IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown podcast, coming to you live on a Tuesday. Going to talk a lot of recruiting information today, namely rivals and 247 recruiting rankings. Final rankings for the 2024 recruiting class have come out. So we're going to instantly react. Well, not instantly. We're going to react to where the Notre Dame's placement was on that, what we liked, what we didn't like. We're also going to talk a lot of early enrollee conversation today, some potential surprises, players we're most looking forward to, some superlatives for the 2024 class getting to the University of Notre Dame. Because, folks, if you didn't know, Notre Dame set a record this year of most early enrollees in a class. They have 15 that are now on campus going through winter workouts. We'll eventually go into spring ball. And we should expect, I think, some instant impact in that class. So who should we be depending upon? Who are guys that maybe need a little bit more time? We'll work through the superlatives. We'll also hit a little bit of a mailbag at the end. So if you have mailbag questions, you feel free to throw it into the chat. And so we're going to get kicked off, though, here with some recruiting rankings, some final rankings that came out recently. I know we wanted to start with rivals, and we're worked into 247. Brian, I know we talked a little bit about this on the phone last night as far as a couple of the rankings, and there's some that we really like. There's some that are a little bit outlandish. There's some that are a little bit absurd. But regardless, I just did some data collection for the rivals and 247 classes as far as top 50 and top 100 players that were signed in the class. For rivals purposes, just so that we have a little bit of context here, since 2015, this was the most top 50 recruits that Notre Dame has signed in a class, 4 overall, and a total of 6 top 100 recruits, which is also the most at Notre Dame since 2015. So last 10 recruiting classes. So Notre Dame, as we know, if you listen to this show, had a pretty dang good recruiting class in 2024. And if you look at the rivals recruiting ranking, for the most part, I think that justifies that ranking that we've been talking about for several months now.
I think overall as a class, nobody's as high on Notre Dame's class as rivals is. I mean, when you just look at the numbers, Ryan, I mean, you talked about the top 250 or, players in their final top 250. And then you look at, just where their team ranking is. I believe Notre Dame is ranked higher by rivals than anybody else. Their per ranking player is higher than just about anybody else. The rankings are always a little bit wonky. Like, I believe they still have Alabama as having signed Julian Sayin and Jameer Grimsley, although they're both gone from the class. And so, when I was actually looking at the rankings and I look at where guys are, so Jameer Grimsley I put to Florida and Julian Sayin I put to Ohio State. If you look at those rankings, Ryan, there's only two schools, according to rivals, that have more top 50 players in this class than Notre Dame, according to rivals. Georgia and Ohio State both have 5. Now, Georgia's class is a little bit nuts. They have 19 players in the top 250. And it's not too far off. Like, there's a few guys that I'm like, I don't think that guy's a top 250 player, but it's not like, how the heck do you have that guy in the top 250, right? You know what I mean? Like, right, it's like, maybe he's closer to top 300, but, like, it's a heck of a class. But they only have one more guy in the top 250 than Notre Dame. Ohio State, when you include Julian Sayin, top 50. Yeah. When you include Julian Sayin for Ohio State, they only have one more guy, and then Notre Dame's tied with Miami with 4. Now, to put in context, when you look at Notre Dame's rival, right, USC only has 5 players in the top 250, period. And Notre Dame has 4 guys in the top 50 for rivals. So the first thing that stands out about Notre Dame's class is just the high level impact of this class. And here's the crazy thing about it. They don't even have Bryce Young in the top 200. So we'll get into like things we like and don't like. This doesn't even include Bryce Young, whom almost everybody else is going to have as a top 50 player. And so you just look at it and you're like, man, this is a really good class. This is a really talented class. And, a class that, as we've talked about all along, Ryan, part of what makes this class so good, I mean, there's the balance and there's the depth and it's all that kind of stuff. But this is arguably the highest potential impact class that Notre Dame has signed in a long time, thanks to guys that were really good early, like C.J. Carr, and then guys that kind of emerged as big-time players. Cam Williams kind of did that as a junior, and then Bryce Young doing that as a senior. Kingston really took off as a senior after kind of being 2 years removed from his injury. So it's very clear that Rivals is incredibly high on Notre Dame's class. 10 of their 23 players, Ryan, they have as top 250 players for Rivals. And that, like I said, that's pretty impressive. And they have several 4-star guys that, like, they have Logan Soldate's a 4-star. Styles Prescott got bumped up to a 4-star by them. Keedron Young is a 4-star, and Sean Sevillano's a 4-star. Bodie Cahoon is a 4-star. Micah Gilbert's a 4-star. Kennedy Urlacher's a 4-star. So those are guys that they have in the top. And then Jack Larson's a 4-star. So they have 10 guys in the top 250, and then 8 more Notre Dame players are graded as 4 stars, even though they're not in the top 250. So you can see, I mean, Rivals is incredibly high on this class for Notre Dame. There's no doubt.
Well, if the unmute button would work. Sorry, folks. I'm navigating a couple different screens, and because I'm literally trying to look at the rankings as I'm talking. But regardless, I think you can make that obviously easy assumption. We'll talk about when we get to 247s as well. I mean, from a high end perspective, I think that both or at least typically what they are, Notre Dame classes are pretty high on what Notre Dame is able to accomplish in the 2024 recruiting class. So let's get on, though. We're going to talk about what we like, some disagreements we have with the Rivals ranking. We'll kick it to you to start us off here, as because there's a lot to digest. Obviously,
a lot to process.
23 players ranked in a specific class. What's one thing that you would say that is a thing that you very much agree with, or the thing that you're happy to see in these rankings?
Well, the thing there's a lot of value in Notre Dame's skill from Rivals. You have a receiver in the top 50, a quarterback in the top 50, a safety in the top 100. They have a running back in the top 150. They have one of their corners, Leonard Moore's in the top 250. So and then Micah Gilbert's a 4-star, Logan Soldate's a 4-star, Kennedy Urlacher's a 4-star. So Keedron Young is just outside the top 250. He was 246 in the last ranking, and I was told he's just outside this time. So there's a lot of Notre Dame skill talent on both sides of the ball. And I'm just talking pure skill, not like big skill like linebackers and tight ends, who they also have. Kingston's a 5-star, and Bodie's a 4-star. Jack Larson's a 4-star, and I think they probably have Jack Larson the most accurately ranked. Everybody else has kind of dropped him to a 3-star. They have him as a 4-star, just outside the top 250. I think that's very fair. I think you can make a case for Jack being inside the top 250 because of how great his hands are, and he's productive, and he's a two-way player. But I also understand some of the physical limitations. He's not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy. I think that's a fair ranking. But I like the skill look, the way that they have the skill. And then, of course, Notre Dame also still has some premium positions that are highly ranked. Middle linebacker, 5-star. Offensive tackle, number 37 overall. Quarterback and receiver filled with 4 stars. Running back filled with 4 stars. Cam's in the top 50. CJ's in the top 50. Both their running backs are 4-star. They have 2 edge rushers ranked in the top 250. And I was talking with a buddy yesterday, and it's like, I like a lot of what Rivals did, but having Bryce Young at 250 or 220, and that's a drop from the December rankings, was the one thing you look at and you're like, you guys were so close. You were so close to getting this right. But it just goes to show the value that they can have 5 guys in the top 100, 4 in the top 50, and you don't even have Bryce Young in the appropriately ranked in our view. I think so. I was glad to see CJ didn't fall too far in theirs. Cam didn't fall. I mean, everybody and the guys that fell, Ryan, for the most part, it was like Aeneas fell 3 spots, Logan fell 4 spots, Bryce fell 4 spots. Those aren't necessarily, we don't think he's as good. It's just 4 guys jumped ahead of him. That's really what that comes down to. But I just think overall there's a lot of balance to this class. It's not just like in the past, Notre Dame will fill up with like O-linemen, linebackers, and tight ends, right? Now it's like there's receivers, there's edge players, there's corners, there's safeties. There's a lot of value in this class. So as far as what I like, you can see that Rivals appropriately values the skill talent that Notre Dame is adding in, much more so than other outlets who will have only Bronte Johnson as a 4-star or higher in the secondary. Yep. They have 3 of their secondary players that are 4 stars or higher, 2 in the top 250, which I think is much closer in line with. Now, we could argue who should be that 3rd 4-star. They have Kennedy Urlacher. You and I may argue that it maybe should be Carson Hobbs instead. But the number of guys there is about where it should be.
The only recruiting platform that has Bodie Cahoon rated as a 4-star after having 203 total tackles and 27 tackles for loss and 9 sacks as a senior. I completely understood the hesitation with Bodie from a recruiting ranking perspective beforehand because it was a projection. You had only seen 5 games of him as a linebacker. Clearly had to learn how to play on the second level more consistently and efficiently. But, I mean, the production combined with 6'2 plus, combined with 215 plus, combined with 4.5 verified speed, and also went to the old U.S. Army game, the new U.S. Army game that Signing Day Sports runs, and was, by all indications, by a couple of people that aren't even Notre Dame allegiance, that he was the best linebacker there by a pretty strong margin. So nice to see him get that 4-star in Rivals. I will also say that I do love just the linebacker rankings in general. I generally agree with it. Now, number 19 overall is a big thing to put on someone, right? The number 19 player in the country, 5-star. But I will say this about Kingston. I remember when Kingston was on the radar after his junior year, as far as like things trending with Notre Dame. I remember seeing him after his junior year, and I'm like, top 100 kid, like him. He's a good player, right? And then you saw him as a senior, you're like, okay, top 50 player, really like him. And then I saw him in San Antonio, and I'm like, yeah, he might be a 5-star. Like, he might be. He might very well be in this class. It's possible. So I love the rankings of the two linebackers, specifically Kingston Viliamoasa and Bodie Cahoon, because I feel like both of them at different points, and it's weird to say for a guy that played at St. John Bosco and was the guy he was, but there was a time where Kingston was a little bit underrated from a recruiting ranking perspective too, man. Like, some people were a little bit lower on him, but yeah, we'll get into a couple of the egregious one. You already mentioned the Bryce Young one. Brian, this is where like recruiting rankings lose me. This is where rankings in general lose me sometimes. I just don't understand because everyone has the right to their opinion. Everybody has the right to watch the film, look at the player, determine how good they are, grade them out, all that type of stuff, right? You have the ability. But how can people who are professionals in this, look at Bryce Young and say, that's the number 24 player in the country and a 5-star. And a couple others look at him and say, that's a top 100 kid, sure. And you look at those differences, you're like, okay, I can get there, right? Like, they see him a little bit differently, but regardless, they still think he's an excellent player. But then a player doesn't even have him in the Rivals, doesn't even have him as a top 200 player in the 2024 class. I just don't understand why there's such a diversity in opinion on some of these players. Bryce Young, saw him out in San Antonio. I know there were probably some Rivals guys out there. I don't know how you watched him all week look the way he looked and say, don't really see it. I don't know why how you watched the season this year and saw the 30 tackles for loss, 14 sacks and said, don't really see it. I don't know how you see his body type and say, don't really see it. Of course, there's room to grow. There's room to improve technique-wise, continuing to fill out his frame, getting stronger. All those things are there, but I just don't know how we're overthinking a player that, by the way, I saw on Notre Dame's website. I think they had some early measurements on. They have him listed right now at 6'7", 245 pounds. Like, how are we overthinking that type of physical profile? That one is the obvious place to start as far as like, hey, bruh, not really sure how that makes sense personally. Not sure.
You saw him. Is he 6'7"?
He's probably close, man. Like, I would say he's probably more in the 6'6" range, but like, he's tall, man. He's tall.
He's really sprouting.
Yeah.
Like, here's the flaw with the Rivals rankings. And look, Rivals has made some changes. I used to crush Rivals for their rankings. And a lot of the people that were involved are not there anymore. As you all know, they hired our guy, John Garcia, as one of their analysts. So John's part of it. You and I have a great deal of respect for John's knowledge, and Rivals respects John's knowledge, which is why they hired him. And there's some other guys that, that I thought were just a joke that are no longer part of the rankings process, So that's good. And they've been better in recent years. But the one flaw is there's still too much regional influence in the rankings. So like if the Florida guy, the Texas guy, and the California guy all think Bryce Young's a top 50 player, but the guy that's in charge of recruiting that region or handling that region says, nope, he's not, then he's not going to be. And that's, to me, a bit of a problem because you have to have more of like it's different when like the IB rankings, we all say, look, these are my rankings. You know what I mean? Like they may be flawed, but the only person to blame if they're wrong is me, not
Right.
anybody else. It's me. And so with that one, it's kind of like you've got to be able to say, hey, I know this is what you think, but we all see something different, and you need to be able to adjust that. So I think that's something that could help fix this a little bit. Is yes, have the influence, but if there's like one that, hey, look, let's make sure that we get this one right. So this is where we have it. Does anybody want to pound on the table and say that we've missed something? And then you need to allow other people to do that. Because like Ryan, I don't have Bryce as a 5-star. He
That's
was
fair.
just outside the 5-star for me because the way that I grade, there's still a lot of technical things that need to be improved with his game.
Yep.
But I have him as a top 50 guy, and I just
I
don't
had
see
him
how
as a
you can
top
have
50
him.
as well.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I just don't see how you can have him much lower than that, Ryan. When you look at the size, the DNA, I mean, you can't ignore that. When you
No.
look at the production in a very good area, you
Yes.
know, you can't deny that. I mean, and he played against a lot of the top players in the country. And so it's just one of those things where I just don't know how you can watch what we saw this year. You look at the production of what we saw this year and come to the conclusion that he should be anywhere outside the top 100. Like
Yeah.
even if you want to say, look, he's really raw, so we're not going to have him in the top 50. Okay. I mean, I don't think that's that completely nuts. I don't agree with it, but I don't think that's completely nuts. But, 220 is way too low. That to me is the most egregious. Like, I mean, there's others that I personally disagree with. I have Cole Mullins higher, and you're higher on Anthony Knapp. You have Anthony Knapp as a 4-star. They have him as a 3-star. I mean, so there's some things like that. I mean, I don't know how Kedron Young fell out of their top 250. Like, that's one that I
Yeah.
think is off. But he's
No.
still a 4-star.
Mikey Gilbert was a little lower too, right? Like two
Yes.
something, I think he
He
was.
wasn't
Yeah.
he wasn't in it at
Oh, he
all. He
wasn't it. He
wasn't in the
wasn't in
top
the top
250 at
250.
all. Yeah, and again, the same person responsible for Bryce Young's ranking is the person responsible for Micah Gilbert's ranking. So but that
Yep.
person also is responsible for Gilby Lambert's ranking.
Sure.
So and Bodie Cahoon being a 4-star. I mean, so again, nobody's perfect. Nobody's going to always get it right. And the person in charge of Bryce's and Micah Gilbert's ranking, I have Mike as a top 150 guy. I think you have him as a top 100 guy, don't you?
Top 150. Yeah.
Top
We're on
150.
the
So
same
we're on
page.
you and I are on
Yep.
the same page there.
Yep.
I don't see how in that area, in that region, he can have the production he had on both sides of the ball and not be a top 250 player at the very least. So there's definitely something. But again, they have him as a 4-star, and they have the whole receiving core as a 4-star. And so there's a lot to like. So there's no ranking is perfect. And people that I know and respect at Rivals could look at my ranking and say, yeah, that guy should be higher, or that guy's too high. You're always going to have those disagreements. But I think overall, they're very close to getting it right. I just think that the one that they got really egregiously wrong is the Bryce Young one. Like even Kedron Young, I have him as a top 100 player, but I can understand him being more in the 250-ish range. I do. Just the way that people look at running backs. He'd probably be my second most egregious as far as him not being in the top 250. That's probably my number 2, and then I'd probably put Micah Gilbert my number 3 of the ones that they got wrong.
Yeah, Mikey Gilbert would probably be second on my list. I don't know how you looked at Micah Gilbert this year and said, "Hey, you liked him beforehand. You saw that he got bigger, more explosive, a little faster, and he finally had a healthy and productive season." I mean, before this year, he had only had 400 something yards in a season was his career high. He had over 1,000 yards as a senior, double-digit touchdowns. Also played safety and did a pretty good job at playing safety as well. So I just don't understand how you watch him. And then he went down to the U.S. Army game, like I said, and he was basically uncoverable all week. They just couldn't do anything with him. So I just think people are missing it with Mikey Gilbert a little bit, man. I think that he could be compared to where rankings are concerned. Like he could end up being one of the big surprises in the class overall, in my opinion. So I'm sure we'll talk about him in, maybe a little bit of a early enrollee impacts potentially and that type of thing. So
let me ask you this question, Ryan. Do you think it's
Yep.
the speed thing? Do you think that's what people do? Because I
I
mean,
don't
he's
think
got
his speed
size,
is
he's
like
got
awful though.
the perception of it, though. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like because he's kind of a smooth guy. He's not. I mean, he's not a
Yeah.
burner. I just
Sure.
wonder if like maybe that because I'm racking my brain trying to figure like before this year I could understand there's the production. Like this guy's
Yeah.
talented, but he hasn't produced. But like this year he did produce. So either they're holding his pass, but here's the thing: if you say they're going to hold his past injuries against him, but like you had him in the top 250 a year ago,
Right.
so
Right.
like,
That doesn't make any sense.
yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
guess it might be the long speed thing. I guess I think it's a little bit underrated, his long speed. I
I
agree. I don't think he's a
I agree
burner by
with
any
you. Yeah,
chance, but I think it's partly that, and I think some of these things are political. I'm not saying it's rivals, right? But like Mike is not like a super media driven guy, right? Like he doesn't
sure.
talk to a ton of people. He doesn't go to like a ton of camps and do all that type of stuff. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's part of it. I don't know for sure, but it's weird regardless. Regardless of what the reason is, it is a very odd ranking.
I
Very odd
just
ranking.
look. I like Bredo Richardson. You know that. I think we
Yep.
both liked him coming out of high
Yeah, he was a
school.
good
But
player.
I
Yeah.
don't know how you have him in the top 200 and you don't have Micah Gilbert in the top 250.
Also, if it's speed concerns for Micah Gilbert, what is there no speed concerns for Breedell Richardson? I'm a little confused about that.
Yeah,
Did my
and
computer
Mike
just?
is
Oh,
inch and a
okay.
half taller
Yep.
and probably 20-25 pounds heavier, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
similar athletically. So yeah, there's a lot to like with Micah Gilbert. So overall, I think Peter Jones being a 4-star. I think they're the only ones that had Peter as a 4-star as well. I believe they're the only service that had Leonard Moore as a 4-star. They had him at 227, which I think is
Yep.
fair, Ryan. They dropped him as a senior because he didn't play a lot as a senior. I think that's fair. Like
Yep.
they originally had him in round 150, 160, but they kind of dropped. He didn't go to camps. They dropped him. He didn't
Sure.
play a ton as a senior. They dropped him, but they still have him as a top 250 player. That's fair. I
Yep.
completely get that. I'd have him a little higher. I like Leonard Moore a little bit more, but when I have a guy that's a top 150 guy and you rank him 227, I'm not beefing with you on
Yeah.
that. I'm not that. Now, if I have a guy as a top 50 guy and you have him in around 220, that to me is a big enough beef to say, hey, that I think you got that one wrong. But I think
Yep.
they nailed that one. I think they're higher on Aeneas Williams than anybody else as well. They had him as a number
They have been for a
149.
long time. They've been higher on
Yes.
him for a long time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now they've steadily dropped him. He was around like 105, 106 at one
Yep.
point in
Number
time.
number one all purpose back or whatever it
Yeah,
was.
but
Yeah.
I
Yep.
think that's more about if you just look at the steady climb, his ranking among running backs hasn't changed really that much. It's mostly just D linemen going ahead of him, linebackers
Yep.
going ahead of him, quarterbacks going ahead of him, receivers going ahead of him, stuff like
And,
that.
I mean, I think we've talked about it, but like Aeneas has kind of been a pretty advanced player for the last couple years,
Yeah.
right? Like he's been who he is the last 2 years, and there's going to be some guys that figure it out when they're a senior and make
Mhm.
dramatic rises physically and have that type of. Also saw that he
Yeah.
was listed at 207 pounds on the website, by the way. So that's
Yeah,
interesting. That's super
I'm curious
interesting.
how accurate that is. That's
Yeah.
gonna be interesting to see. I'm looking at this now, Ryan. They have Kedron, or I mean, they have Aeneas as the number. Let me see here. Do they have? Oh, they have 8. Let me see here. He's at 1. Oh, they have APB. So he's in the top 10 nationally. He's like 8th or ninth all over at running back, which
Okay.
is pretty good. This is a pretty solid
Yeah.
running back class. Like, I don't think there's
Not
any
bad.
stars in this running back class. Like, I haven't seen any guys. I'm like, oh, that's a 5-star. And it's just there's just a lot of good backs that there's not a ton of difference on.
Yep.
But so they have him as a top 10 back in this class. When no, I think you say I believe he's number 1 all purpose. I think you are correct on that.
Yep.
But
At least
he's
he at
8th or
least he
ninth
was
overall as
for
a
a
back.
while.
He's number
Yep.
2 now in the all purpose back,
Okay.
behind Nate Frazier, the kid going to Georgia.
Oh, he's
Pretty
pretty
good
good,
back.
man. I
Yeah, he's
saw him in
pretty good
San
back.
Antonio. He's a pretty good
Yeah,
player.
he's a very good
Yeah.
player.
He got a touchdown pass
Yeah,
down the sideline on like a wheel route in the All American Bowl.
yeah,
That kid can go. That kid
yeah.
can
He had a good
go.
game in that.
But
He had a good bowl game. I didn't see him during the week of practice, obviously, but he performed well. Very,
yep.
very shifty, very quick
Yep.
back. So overall, Ryan, Rivals I thought was good.
Yeah.
247, I didn't have as strong of opinion on
Yeah.
or as favorable opinion as what they do with their rankings, but it wasn't all bad either.
Yeah. Well, real quick, again, the context for rivals, just so everybody knows as we kind of transition to 247, 6 players in their top 100 rankings, which was the most since 2015, at least since
Who's
2015.
number 6, Ryan? I
Number
got Kingston, Giraby, Cam, CJ Bronte. Who am I missing?
I would have to go back and look. I didn't write the names down. I just wrote the
Here, let
numbers
me look
down.
at it real
So
quick. Okay.
Yep. So I had 6 players. I had 4 in the top 50 in 2024, 6 total in the top 100. And that was the most. Notre Dame's never had more than 4 since 2015 outside of this year. So Rivals was very high on them. For 247, despite us having a couple questions as far as where rankings are,
Yeah.
Notre Dame still finished with 5 players in the top 100 by 247 Sports in this ranking, which was the most since 2015. It was the most. There were a couple years. There was 2020, 2021, and 2022 recruiting classes. Notre Dame each had 4 players in the top 100, but Notre Dame in 2024 had 5. So we'll talk about our disagreements and things that we love about this. But for the most part, Brian, I think that 247 tends to not be super high on Notre Dame classes in general. But I guess in theory, you could at least say they like the top of this class more than they have in recent years, right? Since 2015, at least.
Some of their top rankings were kind of ridiculous, but look, they got some right. Like they've got Bryce and Kingston and CJ and as top 50 players. I think they're right on all those. You know, I have Cam I have CJ as a 5-star. I'm me having him in the top 25 and them having him 45. That's not something I'm arguing with anybody about. That's totally fair. I mean, you know, what I would say is if you want to keep him at 45, that's fine. There's just some quarterbacks I'd maybe have ahead of. But you know, Kingston at number 42, that's right where I have him. Little bit lower than where you have him. I think you have him as a 5-star, correct? You have him as a top 25 guy. So not a big difference there. Bryce is a little higher, kind of, you know, pans off. Gearby at number 88 and Cam at 81. To me, those are both too low. Gearby, I actually am not going to argue too much with because I'd have Gearby higher as a top 50 guy. But I still understand there's some development still needed, whatever. So I mean, whatever, he's at 88. But Cam falling, here's the one that doesn't make any sense to me. You had Cam Williams as a top 50 player going into the All-Star game. He practiced one day without pads on and somehow drops to 81. That makes no sense to me. None whatsoever to me.
I mean, we'll talk about all right, so let's go with the All-American Bowl out in San Antonio. Cam Williams was there. Cam Williams played one practice on the first day where it was a torrential downpour, guys. I'm like, honestly with you, it was a torrential downpour. I have pictures and videos of this. It was
I asked
awful.
you if it was snowing because the raindrops were so big
awful.
in the videos you sent me. I'm like, is it snowing down there?
There was no passing game on day one in that first practice. No quarterback could grip the football. Wide receivers were open, but the ball wouldn't get to them. It was just, there was no indication of anything. You can't get anything out of that practice and be like, yeah, that wide receiver's good. That corner's good. Like, got nothing out of it. The second practice, day 2, had two practices that day. The first practice, Cam was cooking. And then he got hurt during that practice and he was sidelined the rest of the week. How can anyone, and Max Torres is in the chat and he was there, Brian, he knows day 1 was miserable. Luckily he was in the Alamo Dome, so he didn't have to be at the West practice or the East practice on the first day, which was outdoors, or West practice that was outdoors. It was awful, man. Like, it was just not great. But day 2, Cam gets hurt in that second practice and he misses the rest of the week. How can you knock a player for basically not participating in the game all week? What are you justifying the ranking on? I don't understand. So look, if Cam Williams went to San Antonio, and because that's a 247 sports thing, right? Like, that's a 247 sports thing, is that event, the All-American Bowl in San Antonio. If you look at that and you say, I put big stock in that game, he struggled all week, I'm going to drop a bunch of spots because I just didn't see it. He didn't look in person the way I thought he looked on film, yada, yada, yada. If that's your baseline, then I would not say a word about it. But how can you make any decisions or any analysis off of what you saw Cam Williams in San Antonio? We didn't see Cam Williams in San Antonio. We didn't see him. It was just, I just don't get that one, man. That one was,
and to your point, the little bit you did see him, you said he looked good. I mean, the first beginning of the
second
first
practice,
second
practice, he was cooking. Yep, he was cooking.
There's no justification for it, Ryan. I mean, that's what it boils down to. It's just I have no idea where it comes from. I mean, no idea where it comes from. But overall, just kind of looking through where Rivals had guys, or 247 had guys. Bryce was the highest at number 24. Kingston was at 42. CJ was at 45. Cam fell 33 spots to 81. Gearby Lambert checked in at number 88. They also had Keedron Young at 111. He fell 8 spots from the last time, which again is more of a just other guys are higher. It's not really dropping him. He was at 111. Bronte Johnson did fall 30 spots to 209. And then Logan Thomas went up 6 spots to number 211. So I thought Bronte dropping that much was too much for me. Keedron's fine at 111. I won't push back for that on that one. That one doesn't bother me at all. The bigger issue with just my beef with 247 overall is not even the like 5 guys in the top 100. It's pretty good, right? We can debate Cam should be higher and all, but he's still in the top 100. Gearby should be higher, still in the top 100. Keedron's just outside the top 100. I got no beef with that. Logan at 221. I got no problem with that. They've got Micah Gilbert and Aeneas Williams and Logan Saldate as 4 stars outside of it. They only have 11. Here's my beef, Ryan. They only have 11 of Notre Dame's 23 commits ranked as 4 stars or higher. That's the even bigger beef that I have with 247. They have over half their class ranked as 3-star recruits. So not only do they have fewer guys in their top rankings than anybody else, but it's only by 2 with Rivals. The difference is Rivals has only 5 of the 23 guys ranked as 3 stars. Rivals has 12. Yep. They have Peter Jones as a 3-star. They have Jack Larson as a 3-star. They have Leonard Moore as a 3-star. They have Carson Hobbs as a 3-star. They have Bodie Cahoon as a 3-star. Anthony Knapp as a 3-star. So I mean, there's some guys that you and I would kind of push back on a little bit and saying, I don't see how you have that guy that low. They have Bodie Cahoon as the 3rd lowest ranked player in the entire class for Notre Dame.
Yeah. And
they have him as the 12th player in the state of Virginia. So the 65th linebacker in the country.
65th.
That is
smoke.
That's
a great linebacker year.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you're talking, so the whole thing, Ryan, to me is just that's the more egregious part of 247 is they got a couple guys right at the top. You can't make it too obvious. You know what I'm saying? And I'll just leave it at that. But some of these rankings, you only have 11 of Notre Dame's 23 signees graded as 4 stars. That to me shows an overall devaluing of the class that you can argue it's intentional or not. I have my feelings because I know the person that runs the 247 rankings. I think I'll just be nice. I have zero respect for what he thinks about football players, and I'll just leave it at that. And, but that's the bigger issue for me, Ryan, is just the overall lack of respect for this class. You beat SEC schools in Florida State to get Bodie Cahoon. Tennessee was pushing for him. Florida State was pushing for him. So,
Miami.
You look at you look at the kids that he's going against. That's it. Leonard Moore's a 3-star. They have him as the 73rd best player in the state of Texas. They have Sean Sevillano as the number 60 player in the state of Florida.
It was on 3 that had Micah Gilbert as the 70-something in Texas last year, right? Wasn't that on 3?
He was in the 100s. Yes.
Yeah. It's gross.
Yeah. Gross. They have Jack Larson as the 16th best player in the state of North Carolina, the number 34 tight end in the country. Peter Jones is the number 41 interior lineman in the country. They have Styles Prescott as the 9th best player in the state of Indiana. They have Teddy Rizak as the 9th best player in the state of Nebraska. You and I don't have Teddy Rizak as a 4-star player, but I have a hard time believing there's 8 better players in the state of Nebraska than Teddy Rizak. I have a hard time with that one. So there's just an overall, to me, devaluing of the class in my view. They have Anthony Knapp as the number 58 offensive tackle in the country. I'm not as high on Anthony Knapp as other people, but I have a hard time believing there's 57 players that I would rank there ahead of him. It just they have Cole Mullins, and I know you're not as high on Cole. They have Cole Mullins as the number 99 player in the state of Georgia.
I mean, Georgia puts out some talent, though, man.
99th best player in the state of Georgia is nuts, especially when you consider the production he had at one of the best schools in the state of Georgia as a junior. So I just think the issue that I have with 247, Ryan, is just more so an overall lack of respect for the class. And in recent years, especially as Barton Simmons is not as involved and is gone, other guys that I think have You know, like I have my disagreements with Steve Wiltfong, but I think when he was involved in rankings, and he hasn't been recently, when he was,
Yep.
from what I'm told, when he was involved with rankings, he would kind of push more for the Midwestern guys, because the Midwestern guys tend to get overlooked outside of the state of Ohio. He would
Sure.
kind of push for those, and you're seeing the Midwestern guys be devalued. You're seeing an obsession with like track times and other silly things like that, boost guys in ways that they shouldn't. So there's a lot that I look at with this class, and I'm just like, this is just a really bad, in my opinion, a really bad ranking. In my
Yeah.
opinion, it's like they're just off on it. I mean, they get some right, great, but the
Yep.
standard isn't like, hey, did you get them all wrong? They got a lot of them wrong. There's just an incredible devaluing of this Notre Dame recruiting class, and you can see it in their rankings too, Ryan. I mean, if you look at the 247 rankings, and I'm just going to go to the team rankings, not their composite rankings, but if you go look at where they have Notre Dame like 10th in the country in this class. 11 guys were 4 or 5 stars, 12 were 3 stars. So, yeah, I have a bit of an issue with their overall ranking of this Notre Dame class. Very
Yep.
much an issue with how they have it ranked. What are your thoughts on it, Ryan?
I would like to, I think an off-season thing that I would like to do one year, and it's not going to happen because I don't know if people would be open to this, but I would like to sit down with the evaluators for all 4 of the major platforms and just talk to them about everything. Like, not to push back, not to have a aggressive conversation. Like, I just genuinely would like to hear the process. You know what I mean? Of like how you got to that number. Like, were you a numerical grading scale? Are you just subjective in your evaluations? How do you come up with these personal rankings? What is your system to rank? Like, there's a lot of things that I think I really like to come up for. But I mean, yeah, overall, there's several of them I just don't agree with. I mean, Bodie Cahoon is not a 3-star player. He's not the number 65th linebacker in the country, whatever the heck you said. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. I don't understand how because I can imagine. I need to actually go back and look what his ranking was, but like, what was his ranking before his senior year started? And you're going to tell me a kid that had over 200 tackles in a season doesn't jump up the rankings? Like, it
I'm
almost
actually
seems like some guys just fall through the cracks and maybe they don't get evaluated really, and they just kind
There,
of get
that's
thrown to the side.
100%,
Yeah.
100%, Ryan. I mean, I think there's a lot to that. Now, do we know this for a fact? No, we don't know this for a fact because we're not in that room. But I don't see how, like you said, I think you nailed it. How do you not adjust him at all based
Right.
on what he did as a senior?
Yep.
Like, how does his ranking not change at all?
Yep.
And I don't get it. Like,
Uh,
because I'm
uh,
going back and looking at his ranking. His ranking has not changed since, I mean, just March of 2023.
mhm.
His grade 88, 88, 88, 88, 88, 88. It hasn't changed at all. So they basically just plugged an 88 grade on him, which is pretty low, and just haven't moved it at all.
And how does
Like,
it not, I mean, like, again, rankings, the rankings thing doesn't tell the full story because some years are loaded, some years are not, some years are in between.
right.
But if you're telling me that his grade didn't
His
improve,
grade, right? Because
he
they
didn't
give like
get
the 88,
personal.
89. Yeah, his
It's
88 grade did not
yeah.
change in the last year.
That's the evaluation versus the valuation conversation, right? The valuation is how he fits into a class, like what the rankings are, what the list
Mhm.
is. And evaluation is talking about what the player is on paper, right? Like, who are they? Where do they grade out? What quality of football player are they? What is the upside, the potential, like that type of thing, right? So you can't look at him and say to me that Bodie Cahoon has been the same player as a senior that he was as a junior. That's asinine. It doesn't make any sense. If you believe that, then I disagree with you, first and foremost. But if that's what you believe, I can handle that a little bit more, Brian. But like when I see that, just full transparency, when I see that though, I question if someone actually graded him though, if it stayed that way. I really do question that. And that's it's a lack of work, right? Like you didn't put in the work to get to your final conclusion.
Right.
I can't justify that. I can't agree with that.
Even if you're going to have him as a 3-star, move him up to an 89. I mean, show
Right.
something. To your point, this shows me this is a kid that committed to Notre Dame early. He's not going to be a highly ranked guy. We're going to get no clicks off of it. He's from an area we don't really, you know, and he's there's just no reason for us to reevaluate him. He's not a highly ranked guy. He's not Chris Cole. There was no period where there was any kind of, for me, he picked Notre Dame over the summer, but for a while there, it was kind of like, yeah, I mean, really going back to March, it was kind of like, yeah, this is Notre Dame's to lose. Right. And so I'm trying to say this the right way, but I don't have any other way. There was nothing in it for them to reevaluate him properly.
Yeah.
In my opinion, there just wasn't. And so, I don't even know if they had anybody at the Army All-American Bowl. I have no idea.
No idea.
But, like you said, I mean, Tom Lemming, who's someone I do respect, just raved about the kid to you, right? When you talked to him and the production that he had. But it just looking at the senior film, I don't know how you don't move his grade at all. In the same area as Chris Cole, they played each other this year. They played the same exact schools. Bodie Cahoon's production in that area was significantly better than Chris Cole's, who's an outstanding player. I love Chris.
I love Chris Cole.
He's a top 100 guy. I mean, easily. So this isn't a knock on Chris Cole or saying Bodie should be ahead of Chris Cole. I don't have Bodie ahead of Chris Cole. But just his production alone in and region against the same competition that Chris Cole played against should at the very least make you rethink and reevaluate this player. Hey,
and when they played against
the same region, Bodie they lost, but Bodie played really well in that game, if I remember.
Bodie had like 18 or 20 tackles in that game, like 3 tackles for loss. The only reason they lost that football game was because they had a third-string quarterback game because their top 2 were out, and they threw like 2 pick sixes or something like that. Like offensively, they gave it like 150 yards against Salem, who also had Peyton Lewis that's going to Tennessee at running back. And Chris Cole plays offense for them as well. I mean, yeah, I just don't get it. Right. I mean, he is Brian. I mean, again, production's not everything. There's projection to evaluation, obviously. But I'm talking about a 6'3", 215+ pound kid that just averaged 18 tackles a game last year.
Right.
That's what we're doing. Like I don't
247 has Peyton Lewis ranked as a top 200 player. I mean, so again, this is not some kid that they don't know about. This is a guy that they have viewed as a top player. I'm actually curious what his production was against Patrick Henry. Actually,
couldn't have been great. Could not have been great.
I'm very curious to see what that was. So yeah, we'll it's a. I mean, we all know I know what I think it is, Ryan. We've discussed this. I think that there's a clear, to me, I'll just come out and say it. I think there's a clear bias at 247 against Notre Dame. Right. That's my belief, and everything that they do to me just screams that that's the case. So, but that was a pretty egregious one to me.
Yep.
Like, I think Cam Williams dropping 38 spots is just stupid. But they still have him as a top 100 player.
Doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just it's almost like you're punishing him for not being able to play in the All-Star game that you are part of the picking process for the selection process. I don't know. It's weird.
Like somebody in the chat just said just 247, and I'm like, honestly, I Rivals used to have a bias against Notre Dame, but the guy that was the primary driver of that's not there anymore. I don't think Rivals has an anti-Notre Dame. And if anything, when you look at over the last couple of years, I think Rivals has been more favorable and more favorable to Notre Dame players in the last couple of years, in my opinion. I don't think Charles Power has an anti-Notre Dame bias at all. I mean, there's guys that on 3 will have ranked way higher than anybody else. They have Anthony Knapp and Styles Prescott as top 200 players coming in. They haven't released their final rankings. They had Charles Jagasol ranked way higher than anybody else did last year. I think they have I think Charles Power has an evaluation problem at certain positions. Like, that's my issue with him. I think he doesn't evaluate quarterbacks very well, is one example. But I think he has Kingston way too low. But that's not a Notre Dame bias. I think that's a bad evaluation by Charles Power, in my opinion, because there's other players that Notre Dame has a very favorable ranking for. I don't think I just haven't noticed a bias against Notre Dame and on 3 as much as I see Charles Power just missing and just being just that's way off.
Because it's not like there's just like several players nationally that you just kind of disagree with. It's not just a Notre Dame.
Brandon Inniss barely in the top 100 last year. I thought Brandon Inniss was a borderline top 10 overall player. I just think receiver is in a position where he tends to overrank offensive linemen. That's his biases are more of natural biases, like I have, like we all have. We all have certain biases, and when you evaluate as much as we do, Ryan, there's always things that you just tend to put more emphasis on than someone else does, and you have to guard against that bias, right?
Yeah,
and you have to put up some kind of guardrails against it. So I wouldn't argue. I actually would not say that On3 has an anti-Notre Dame bias. I haven't picked up on that, Ryan. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but I've never looked at like, oh, they so hate Notre Dame. I just think it's more of just I think they get certain things wrong, and we all do. Right? Josh Barajas is a top 25, 30 player coming out of high school. That guy couldn't even play at Illinois State. You know what I mean? Like we all get them wrong. I don't. Is
that think where he ended up? Illinois State?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, and
Micah Jones ended up there too. I think, right? Micah Jones ended up at Illinois State.
So we all get stuff wrong, Ryan. It just sometimes you can tell like it clearly tends to be a Notre Dame issue, and with 247 to me in recent years, it didn't used to be this way, but with the new folks in charge, somebody said, like with like maybe he has a bias against CJ Carr, but I don't think it has anything to do with Notre Dame. I think he'd feel the same way about CJ Carr if CJ Carr would have picked Ohio State or Michigan or anybody else, right? So we all have those biases. I don't think there's a school bias for Notre Dame with On3 or rivals. ESPN, I don't think that they have an anti-Notre Dame bias as much as they just have a pro-South and a pro guys that play in their all-star game bias.
Yeah.
That's more of the bias they have. I mean, that would be the next closest to having an anti-Notre Dame bias just because they're a northern school. But I think 247s is a little bit of a different story. In my opinion, it's a little bit of a different story for me.
Well, folks, that's the Rivals ranking. That's the 247 ranking. We're going to get into early enrollee talk next, talk about the 15 players that Notre Dame has already set on campus and starting into the winter workouts. Before we get there, if you could just please hit that like button for us, folks. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Also hit that notification bell as well as you listen to us live on the channel. If you're listening to us afterward on your favorite podcast platform, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. And we'll talk to you about some early enrollees next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. All right, Brian, we're going to break this up into multiple sections, obviously. We're going to talk about early enrollees on the offensive side of football, defensive side of the football. But let's start from a general overview. Notre Dame has 15 early enrollees on campus already in the 2024 class, the most in Notre Dame history, a program record. Expectations for this class, and we'll talk about each of them individually, obviously. But this has the opportunity. Anytime you get a large group on campus early, that gives them the entire offseason to develop in the weight room, to understand the scheme, work with coaches, work with their future teammates, and get ready for spring ball. So Notre Dame has a chance, I think, to have several players that could give you a lot of impact early. But I think the depth of this class also, you have guys that are able to set up for the future and start developing to find their niche with this program in the near future. That will also translate to the long term as well.
This is such an intriguing situation, Ryan, for Notre Dame because there's so much impact potential in this class overall, which we've been talking about for a year. And there's so many of them coming on campus. But there's also not a ton of spots there for guys to just immediately slide into. Where in past years, like Cam Williams, just one season before is a no-brainer to play as a freshman. Yeah. Now, I mean, I fully expect him to play, but he's going to have to earn it. Whereas last year, he just would have. I mean, he would have had to play. We talked about it last year. We said at least 2 freshmen are going to have to play this year. This year, none of them have to play.
If he was early enrollee that could play in the bowl game for whatever reason, if they made an amendment to that rule, he probably would have played in the bowl game too. I mean, honestly, but
that's right. But when you look at it now, like he's going to have to earn that. There's past years where Kingston Viliama-Asa is a no-brainer going to play as a freshman, maybe start, and now it's like he still may do those things, but he's going to have to earn it and beat out some really good players. In past years, Sean Sevillano, Bryce Young are no-brainers. They're you plug them into the 2 deep the minute they arrive on campus because they didn't have a whole lot else. I mean, Myron Tungvaloa Mosa and Kurt Heinisch both played a lot as true freshmen. Why? Because they didn't have anybody else after the starters. It was like, Jerry Tillery and Jonathan Bonner, and then after that, it was like Elijah Taylor and Brandon Tiassum and Micah Treadway, just guys that just weren't going to play at Notre Dame. Whereas now it's like there's some guys, Ryan, that you look at and be like, in past years, I mean, Keidron Young, Aeneas Williams, where they're going to play right away. Now, this group's going to have to battle a little bit, which twofold to me. Number one is they're going to have to really push themselves, but also having them on campus with their ability is going to push the veterans, because it's not going to take the receivers many workouts once Cam gets going to be like, I got to better step up because this kid's really dynamic. It's not going to take the linebackers very long to be like, I better bring my A game today because this Kingston Joker, this cat's bringing it in the weight room, in the classroom, on the track. I mean, this kid's from Cali and he's out walking around in shorts and he's running in the snow and, doing, I mean, I better bring it today.
Yeah. He's on shorts and slides. Like,
yeah.
All right, man. All right.
And it's just like, this group is coming, man. I mean, this group is going to come in here and compete. And, if you're a running back and you look at Keidron Young and Aeneas Williams, it's not going to take you many workouts to be like, I better bring it today because these guys are pretty good. And I think that's something that has me fired up, Ryan, is the competition that they're going to add to this roster, bringing these 15 kids plus at least 6 position players that are early enrollees. You're going to have over 20 new faces on the depth chart this summer of dudes that can play.
Yeah.
And to me, that's going to really ramp up competition for Notre Dame this spring, which is a very, very good thing for me.
Well, I would say this too, is that it's going to improve depth twofold. And it's not as simple as adding 15 players to the depth chart. Obviously, folks, like that adds depth to the room. That adds depth. That is more players than you had before National Signing Day. Sure. But I think that it also, what it does, some guys aren't going to be threatened, right? Like there's some guys on the roster right now, like Benjamin Morrison, as good as, well, actually no corners are even really rolling. So that's a bad example. Let me say defensive tackle, Riley Mills, Howard Cross. They're the guys, right? They're the guys in 2024. I don't think Riley Mills is going to look at Sean Civillano and be like, that guy's coming to take my job. I just don't think that that's going to be his impulse. But who is it going to affect? Devin Houston better bring his game, right? The depth is where it is. Armand Muka,
Rubio, Jason Onye, right? Donovan Heinisch, exactly.
You're improving depth twofold. Not only adding bodies, but creating competition for the depth. And I think that is only going to strengthen everything, because I always talk about this every single year. Like, why was Georgia so dominant for those 2 to 3 year span there? It was because Georgia could just cycle in bodies, man. It was just like, cool, Jordan Davison and Devontae Wyatt are out. Here comes Jalen Carter and Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse. And like those, after a while, throwing waves and waves at you, you would just submit a little bit. You're just like, dude, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I just don't have the depth. I don't have DT 3 through 6 that a Georgia has. I don't have corner 3 through 4 that Georgia has. I don't have running back 2 to 3. I don't have wide receiver 4 to 5. Like, you just don't have the same amount of depth as some of the top programs in college football. Notre Dame, one of the biggest improvements that I think they've made since Marcus Freeman has come to Notre Dame and to become the head coach, is the depth has gotten a whole lot better at a lot of different positions, man. You now look at some positions and you're like, if God forbid someone gets hurt, you can sustain that. Like, you're okay. You can figure it out. The depth piece, I think, is the biggest thing, and it's going to create competition to make that depth even better in 2024.
Something else I would add, Ryan, is we're seeing more high floor guys coming into the program than we've seen in the past. And even a guy like Bryce Young, who's still kind of technically raw and is going to need some weight room time, he's still a physical freak that can come in and help you right away. Even a guy like Logan Thomas, who's going to need a lot of weight room time. You're just like, but even with that explosiveness, that twitchiness, like, dude, that if you're a third down pass rusher, you better bring it, because that, at the very least, you can find it. There's so many kids like that. Gearby Lambert, who's not an early enrollee, so that's a bad example. But Keidron Young is physically ready to play right now. Aeneas Williams is physically ready to play right now. Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert are physically ready to play right now. Kingston is physically – Kingston's built like a lot of juniors in college right now.
He's on the roster at like 6'3", 232 already. So it's pretty big kid.
So there's just a lot of kids like that, Ryan, that are early enrollees that are not just talented, but guys that can play right now. Which, because like if you're an offensive lineman and you're a 2 deep guy and they bring in a really talented offensive lineman, but he's 260 pounds, nothing to worry about. But like last year's group, they brought in, 330-pound Charles Jagazal, 326-pound Sullivan Absher, 310-pound Charles, or Sam Pendleton. It's like, okay, these guys are dudes. I mean, I got to bring it. And so I think that's something that I look at as well is the floor is so much higher of this group. Now, of course, the ceiling is raised as we've talked about, but the floor is higher too, because they are adding so many guys that can play right now. And that's a big part of it as well. So I think there's a lot to like about this class, Ryan. And something else too is I think it's important, and I'm curious to get your thoughts about this one too, Ryan, is I think when you have a freshman class that has a chance to impact the roster as much as this one does, the more guys that you can get in early, the better it is for you to take a bigger leap towards establishing your culture, because you're not adding as many new faces and new attitudes and all those type of things when you get to summer. If you think about it right now, there's only be 8 new guys on the roster this summer of high school. That's it. Like that used to be a big early enrollee number too. So I think you're going to have so much more of your team in 2024 on campus right now. You have all your there's still one transfer I'm not sure of if he's going to be on campus this spring, but you have at least 6 position players, and you have 15 early enrollees. That's 21 new guys. A bunch of your team is together now. And you and I have talked a ton about how important the culture is for Notre Dame. Having this many players on campus right now, competition, this, that, and the other, but you're able to establish the culture now, and the vast majority of your team is going to be part of that culture building period. I think that is huge for Notre Dame as well, Ryan, because in past years, you'd still have 8, 9, 10 guys still at home to add with the other 8 that are at home. And now you're adding 15, 18 guys to your roster over the summer. That's a lot of new guys you got to get going. Now it's kind of like you've got other freshmen that are going to be able to say, hey, man, we got you. This is how we do it.
Yep.
Kennedy Urlacher is going to be on campus. So when Bronte and Tabron Benny Powell show up this summer, he can be like, hey, here's how we do it. Let's roll. And he'll, in a lot of the early workouts, he'll be also working out with like Leonard Moore and Carson. Yep. So there's that younger player that can say, hey, man, here's what we do. Kingston can kind of, hey, Bodie, Teddy, here's what we do. And you've got all your D linemen on campus, and there's only one offensive lineman not on campus right now. So it'll be easy for like Peter and Stiles and Anthony Knapp to say, hey, Gearby, let's get you caught up to speed. So I think all those things factor too. But I think that culture building piece is something that I hadn't really thought about a lot until the last day or so when I've been thinking about doing the show. Like, dude, you're going to have a big chunk of your team in 2024 is on campus right now.
Yeah.
And I think that could be, if they handle it correctly, and I'm confident they will, that could be huge for this team, because that's the one final piece that you and I have talked a lot about that Marcus Freeman needs to get rolling, is the culture part of it, taking that to another level.
Well, and I would also say this is outside of just like culture building. You also have out of the early enrollees, there are a few that I would say were in serious need of that physical development, being able to work with Coach Lendow this whole off season. I mean, you mentioned Logan Thomas being a guy that he needs to get to the weight room. He needs to be able to fill out and to develop his body physically. Bryce Young is another that needs to continue to do that. Anthony Knapp is another player that needs to continue to do that. There are a few players that I think Notre Dame, it's wise to be able to get them. And then anytime you get a big-time quarterback in early, especially to be able to work during the bowl prep and then now into the offseason, to be able to assimilate to the understanding of what the expectation is and what the playbook looks like and how you go about your business day in and day out, that stuff all matters. That stuff really all matters. So I'm excited to see. My favorite, I don't know if you agree with this, covering it, but I remember when I was just a fan of the program and didn't cover it at all. My favorite thing every single year was watching what the weights on the roster were before or like in the winter, and then what they were when spring practice opened up. To see those weight gains, like that was the cool part of it, man. Like, this guy's up 10 pounds from the spring. This guy lost 4 pounds, lost 4 pounds going into the spring. They gained 20 pounds. Like, I don't know if that's just a me thing or if that's a general fan thing, but you like seeing what the work has been this offseason, what these guys have been putting in and day out. And the spring practice is just it's a great extension of that, obviously, but the work is being put in right now, man. And it's gonna be fun. I mean, I even like Brendan Vernon was one, not talking about obviously this early enrollee period, but Brendan Vernon, Brian, I was actually texting with someone close to Brendan Vernon. I was like, yo, man, I saw in the roster, Brendan Vernon's up to 274 pounds. Is he only 259? He's like, yeah, man, he's been putting in work this offseason.
Well,
Like he's up 15
and they
pounds
took a
already,
lot
you
off
know?
of him. He got down in
Yeah.
the 240s early in his
Yep.
Notre Dame tenure because they wanted to get a lot of that bad. There was still some. He got a lot of it off on his own, which you saw at the Army game or at the All American game last year. But they got a lot of that off, and they've really bulked him up in good weight.
Yes.
And so it's going to be interesting to see. And that's the other thing too, Ryan, is a lot of these guys you say, okay, well, now we're going to start finding out where guys are going to end up playing now that they're on campus and
Right.
those type of things. And so that's going to be kind of true. That's the final piece of this is, okay, where does Cam Williams play? He's playing receiver. Yeah, I know that, but is he boundary? Is he field? Is he slot? You know, like those are other parts of it too that you start to kind of get your first glimpses of this spring. So I'm excited. Yeah. I think this early, and we're going to dive into the specifics, offense, defense here next, and talk about expectations and all that kind of stuff. But just overall, I think this freshman class is going to have a big impact on this roster directly and indirectly, and that's why it's so important to get so many of these kids on campus early, because the more of them that are on campus, the earlier the better, the more chance they have to really impact this roster. Again, directly, them playing. Indirectly, their play raises the standard for everybody else. If you want to keep Kingston off the field, you better step up and play really, really well. If you want to keep Cam Williams and Keidron Young and Aeneas Williams and Logan Thomas and all these guys off the field, you better bring it starting now, because these kids are coming in hungry. And the final piece, Ryan, and you know this, the Notre Dame coaches have been preaching to this entire class, just like they did last year. You are not coming here to sit. You were coming here to compete. And that's a big piece of it as well.
Yep. They need to come in. They compete very early on, because it is going to be a young. We talk about the big end position. Like, yes, you brought in RJ Oben, and we'll talk about this with Bryce Young, but Bryce Young needs to come in with that thought process of like, dude, like I have an opportunity here. Like there is a chance that I can come in and get serious snaps, if not start at some point in 2024. That needs to be his expectation. Safety position, you have a little bit of a depth issue. Like Kenny Urlacher can come in and give you any sort of depth. That would be great. That would be fantastic. And then I think you hit on something key though. I really do like seeing kind of where guys fit in positionally. We know where certain guys are going to be playing. But, I mean, it even comes down to, like, Anthony Knapp. Is he going to get an early started offensive tackle, or are you going to move him inside full-time early on? Is Styles playing left tackle, right tackle early on in his Notre Dame tenure? Like, there's a lot that's going to be figured out and a lot that's going to be really interesting to watch. So, folks, we're going to get into the more specifics next here. We're going to talk offensively expectations for early enrollees, because, by the way, there's 9 players that are early enrollee on the offensive side of the football out of the 15. So 9 out of 15 offensively. We'll get into that next. Make sure, again, like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell at the bottom of the screen, 5-star reviews on any and all of your favorite podcast platforms, boards.irishbreakdown.com for all the latest recruiting and team intel. We're talking offensive early enrollees here next on the Irish Breakdown podcast. So, Brian, like I said, there is 9 early enrollees on the offensive side of the ball. We talked about the overall feeling of what this class can do in its entirety, talking about the 15 early enrollees on campus. But let's get a little bit more specific here, because we'll talk expectations, talk about what you're excited for. Let's talk about it. It has to start with, and the early enrollees, just for people that don't know, on the offensive side of the football, quarterback CJ Carr, running backs Keidron Young, Aeneas Williams, wide receivers Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, tight end Jack Larson, offensive lineman Styles Prescott, and Anthony Knapp. Those are the early enroll. And Peter Jones, excuse me. And Peter Jones, excuse me. Yes,
all
so that is
Gearby,
the 9.
right? Gerby.
Yep, all but Gerby. Yep. So 9 players that are on campus here, offensive side of the football. Let's start with CJ Carr, because we've even gotten a little bit of glimpse of him already. He was obviously in bowl prep. I know you guys had availability to the practice and got to see him throw the football around a little bit. And expectations for 2024, it's very nuanced, Brian, because I think that a lot of people are very high on CJ Carr. I know that you are very high on CJ Carr. I know that the Notre Dame staff is obviously very high on CJ Carr, the future, the potential here. Coming into this situation, though, I think it's all about, especially early, getting used to everything, right?
Yeah.
The day in and day out of playing quarterback, because it's not a position where CJ Carr has to come in and start from day one. This is more
Right.
about setting up for the future and getting a really good foundation moving forward here as an early enrollee.
Yeah, and he actually got a even bigger start than anybody else did because he had about a week and a half worth of practices because he enrolled. He actually was able to get started on was it December 16th? So I think it's about a week and a half worth of practices and got to be down. I mean, he was on the field. I was down on the field before the bowl game. He wasn't dressed because he couldn't play. But he had traveled with the team and was down there and all that kind of stuff, which was good for Notre Dame and good for CJ because, as you said, it gets to lay that foundation of learning the offense, getting to know Gino Gaduli and what his coaching style is and what his expectations are and what the practice reps are like and all those type of things. I mean, that was an important thing for CJ. And no, we don't expect CJ to be the starter this year, but it also isn't a year that CJ just gets to kind of take off and chill and learn and all those type of things because he is sitting behind, along with Kenny Minchie and Steve Angeli, a one-year player at Notre Dame when you look at Riley Leonard, who's only going to be here for 1 year. And so the question is okay, who's going to be that guy that puts himself in position to win the job when Riley leaves? The other part of it, too, it also is, are the quarterbacks on the roster now going to be able to play at a level that allows them to prevent or encourage the staff, I should say, not to go to the portal again next year? Because Notre Dame does not, I can say this confidently, Notre Dame doesn't have any desire to go into the portal next year for a starting caliber player. There's a chance they're going to have to go to the portal next year for a transfer for a depth guy because they do want 4 quarterbacks. Although I'm curious, does Anthony Rizak have the ability to be kind of come that 4th quarterback along with Dylan Devison? That could be the case as walk-ons. But you have to give them a reason not to go to the portal. Say, well, are they going to keep going to the portal? Depends. It depends on the development we see from the depth chart that's going to be behind Riley Leonard. And it can't just be one guy. It has to be a lot of them. And so CJ's part of that process. The development, especially of CJ and Kenny Minchie this offseason, is going to be huge towards Notre Dame feeling like they have the confidence in their depth chart to not have to go to the portal next year for a starter. And if you're CJ, Steve Angeli's 2 years ahead of him, so that's a little bit of a different deal. Steve will be a junior next year, but like with Kenny Minchie, he's right in front of you. He's been on campus, 2 semesters ahead of you, but you're competing with him because when Riley leaves, you're going to have to say, hey, I'm ready to be that guy. I'm ready to step into the lineup and be that guy. So even though CJ Carr is an early enrollee, he's not going to, even though he's not a guy that's going to necessarily be competing for a starting job right now, the work he's putting in, the work Kenny Minchie's putting in, the work Steve Angeli's putting in, it may not have any impact on who starts this year because that's going to be Riley Leonard. But what if Riley Leonard gets hurt? What if Riley Leonard, doesn't play well for the first 4, 5, 6 games of the year, plays really bad football? How quickly are you able to take hold of that starting job to where if that time comes, you're that guy? Because if you kind of like CJ's got to take there does need to be some immediacy to CJ and because when we're just talking about the freshman, this is also true of Kenny Minchie, but I don't have to keep throwing that clarifier in there. We're just talking about the freshman right now. But for CJ, if you want to be the starting quarterback when Riley leaves, you have to prepare yourself now to battle for that job because you are battling for that job now. And yes, you're going to be behind. You've got to learn the offense. You've got to learn the drills. You've got to learn this. You got to get stronger. The weight room is going to be important for CJ and all that type of stuff because he doesn't have the thick frame that Kenny Minchie kind of showed up with. CJ's got to build his body up quite a bit. But the competition for Riley Leonard's replacement started, Monday, January 15th, when all the players arrived on campus. It started then because you need to put yourself in position to where you get into the fall ready to compete for that job, that number 2 job, to whereas if Riley does get hurt, you can be that guy. Because let's just say hypothetically that Notre Dame needs a new starting quarterback in week 3 and you're not that guy, and that guy steps in and plays well, guess what? You fall further behind that guy in the battle the next year to become the starting quarterback. And so, to me, that's what CJ's up against. I mean, that's the importance of it. So we'll talk a lot about, Riley's the guy. There's not a real quarterback competition for the starter. To me, there is definitely a quarterback competition. Definitely a quarterback competition this spring. It's just not for the starting quarterback. And the key for CJ is going to be thrusting himself into that as quickly as possible. That's going to be a very, very big key for CJ going forward is to put himself in that position. After CJ, obviously, when you look at where Notre Dame is and who's going to have a chance, we're just going to kind of go position by position. So we're going to go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and offensive line, and we're going to go to running back next because this is a very interesting position for me because I'm very curious to kind of see who comes back this spring. I'll just leave it at that. I'm very curious to see, what players are going to be part of the roster this offseason. So when you look at, right now, Notre Dame's spring roster, they have Devin Ford as part of that roster. Obviously Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love, and Jabron Payne. And then, of course, the two new freshmen in Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams. Does that stay the same? Are they able to kind of push their way up the depth chart? And we all look at like, well, who's going to be back and who's going to do this and who's going to be. Well, a lot of that at running back to me is going to fall on to the feet of the running backs. Do they grow up? And I'm talking about as players. Do they grow up quick enough to push their way into the top three? That's a good question because that could shake up the whole board. I mean, right now you look at it, you've got Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love in a sort of a 1A, 1B situation coming into the season. You look at Jabron Payne finished the season as kind of their third down, power back. Devin Ford's a little bit of a special teams, do it all kind of guy. And then you've got the two freshmen. And so when I look at those players, Ryan, who's part of this team in the fall could very well come down to what the competition is like with the freshmen and how quickly they can get acclimated to say, this Kedron dude is going to play for us, or this Aeneas guy's got to play for us. You know what I mean? That could then shake up the roster because that could maybe make a guy that plans on coming back look at things and say, boy, I'm not really sure if this is the best spot for me because I just had a freshman pass me up. Or those guys hold down their jobs and they sit out a year, which is, fine too. But these are two kids that are going to be, if they come in and work, and that's going to be the thing for them, if they come in and put in the work, they're going to be guys that could be hard to keep off the field next season. They really could.
Well, because I think they bring a couple niches to the table that are, I won't say lacking at Notre Dame, but I mean, are unique to the running back room. I mean, because you just lost Aldrich Estime to the NFL, who is what? 227 battering ram of a running back. You don't really have that guy as much in that room right now. Like you have some power, but for the most part, it's more built about explosive speed and home run ability right now, based upon Jeremiah Love, who's 190 something pounds, based upon Jadarian Price, who's 207 pounds, 206 pounds, whatever the heck he's listed at now. You don't really have a guy that is a true downhill between the tackles guy that can truly carry a load. And although it's hard to put that on someone as a freshman, the niche of power and explosiveness that Kedron Young brings to the table. I mean, why not a short yardage back potentially? Why not a change of pace power back is essentially in certain situations? He has that chance to find that niche. I mean, he's 217 plus pounds. He was 217 pounds down in San Antonio, which was actually 8 pounds lighter than what he played as a senior at Lufkin. He was up at 225 pounds. So he's a physically put together kid. He is going to be the heaviest running back in that room. I mean, he is right now the heaviest running back that Notre Dame has, the most powerfully built running back. Well, I don't want to say that. Jadarian Price is pretty powerfully built, but one of the most physically imposing backs that Notre Dame has on the roster. And then you talk about Aeneas Williams. He brings that all-purpose profile. I mean, literally, Brian, the craziest numbers that I saw was he ran for over 4,000 yards in his career at Hannibal. He had over 3,000 yards receiving as well at Hannibal. I mean, he was used as a wide receiver at times, in the slot, out wide, out of the backfield as a pass receiver. you have guys that can do that. Like Jeremiah Love could do that, right? Jadarian Price could do that, but nobody was as prolific as what Aeneas Williams was as a pass receiver coming out of high school. Not anybody on the roster. So does he have an opportunity to be a niche pass catcher early on in his Notre Dame career? Those opportunities are in front of these guys because they have those niches to them that are unique to their profiles.
Yeah. Ryan, I just want you to just think about this for a second. 7,000 yards of offense and over 150 touchdowns. I don't care what level of football you're playing at. Yep. That is ridiculous.
Yep.
And if you look at it, the two of them combined, Notre Dame is adding 8,000 high school rushing yards worth of talent and production to their roster. Because Kedron was like, 20 yards below 4,000?
Yeah, and like 3,988 or something like that.
And Aeneas was over. Yep. And so that's a ton of production. Now, Kedron doesn't bring a whole lot to the table from a pass game standpoint in high school. We'll have to see what he can do. I don't know what – I mean, I know I saw the video you sent me. I mean, he catches the ball fine. I mean, I thought he caught the ball. He looked natural catching the ball.
Comfortable.
We just haven't seen him do it. He wasn't used to do it a whole lot. So that
he only had like 3 receptions his senior year or something like that. It was like a crazy number.
Which, I mean, I was actually pleasantly surprised with how natural he was catching the ball in those drills that you sent me from San Antonio. Now, that's a whole different deal than catching it in the game when you haven't done it with guys closing on you, right? So there'll be an adjustment there. But, like, the guy that, to me, needs to fend off Kedron Young the most is Jabron Payne. Because I could see Kedron being sort of that third down back. Because Notre Dame's third down back is first and foremost a pass blocker. And as you mentioned, this is the biggest running back they're going to have this year. I mean, he's the strongest, most physical, thick lower body that they're going to have. I thought Jabron Payne did some good things there last year. He's very inconsistent, but he's a sophomore. He's learning. Jabron will get better. If you know Jabron Payne, he's going to work and get his game better. And so I expect him to be more consistent in that regard next year. But Kedron is the kind of guy that you can look at and say, short, because Jabron was also sort of there when Audric went out. He was their short yardage goal line back as well. Well, both of those roles, I could see Aeneas and Kedron battling for the third down role, and I could see Kedron battling for that short yardage goal line role. So Jabron Payne's going to be a guy that's going to have to really bring it this spring, and it just kind of goes back to the whole thing we talked about at the beginning, Ryan, in kind of part one of this breakdown is if Jabron Payne, if there's a real competition, and Jabron Payne is still the third down and the goal line short yardage back this year, guess what? He's going to be really good at that role because he'll have to be. Because if he isn't, he's going to get beat out. Because I like Jabron. I graded him as a 4-star player. I don't think he has the natural God-given ability that Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams have. I don't. So for him to hold them off, he's going to have to be really good. And if Jabron is really good and does hold them off, guess what? Notre Dame now is a 3-headed monster at running back with Jadarian and Jeremiah. And that's how you start saying, boy, this thing could get really, really good.
Yep.
It could get really good.
I mean, we talked about it last year because it was an embarrassment of riches at running back in 2023 season in general, but it's not slowing down, guys. Like you just talked about 5 running backs that I think are all really good players, right? It's like Jeremiah Love, explosive breakaway runner, kind of a high cut kid. Jadarian Price has already shown that he can create some big plays at Notre Dame when he's got back healthy from his Achilles injury as a freshman. You have Jabron Payne, who has shown that he has a pretty solid overall all-around game. You're adding in Aeneas Williams with his all-around skill set. You add in Kedron Young with his power, explosiveness profile. Notre Dame's going to be sick at running back. And if either one of those kids are able to crack the rotation, that means that they're really good at the end of the day, right? Like that means that they are really, really good football players because it's not going to be easy to crack the rotation. But if they did, would I be shocked? No. Wouldn't be shocked. It's just a testament to the recruiting that Dylan McCullough has been doing over the last couple of years and the developments that Dylan McCullough has had at the running back position. They are in a good spot running back wise. Wide receivers, the 2 guys on campus. Only Logan Saldate is not going to be on campus of the 3 wide receivers. So you have Cam Williams and you have Micah Gilbert. Very different players. Cam listed around 6'2", 190, 195 pounds. Sleek, downfield type of athletes, really has really good acceleration and foot quickness. And then you got Micah Gilbert, who's kind of that 6'2", 6'2.5", 205 plus pound physical kid who can play outside. Pretty nuanced route runner, though, can win with size and can do a lot of things after the catch as well with his physicality. So, wide receiver position, Brian, again, you're talking about the depth's pretty good, man, as far as you bring in Chris Mitchell, you bring in Bo Collins, you bring in what's the kid's name from Marshall that they just picked up that will be in at some point.
I'm telling you the answer, Ryan,
Yeah.
but the problem is I
Yes.
muted myself. So
Yes,
you were
I'm sorry.
like,
Yes.
I'm like, Ryan, Jaden Harrison,
Jaden
Brian.
Harrison. I know.
No,
Jaden
but I
Harrison.
kept saying
Jaden
it,
was in my mind.
and I'm like, why is he not listening to me? And then I
for
looked,
some
I'm like,
reason,
oh, I'm muted
for some
myself.
reason, Jaden was in my mind, but I kept thinking Hamilton for some reason. I don't know why,
Well,
but yes, Jaden
Ryan,
Harrison.
when you are trying to remember a Notre Dame player's name at receiver, if you guess Jaden, you've got a pretty good shot of getting it right since they have so many Jadens on their roster at wide receiver right now. So,
Nice.
you know, yeah, it's amazing, Ryan, where they are now compared to where they were a year ago from a depth standpoint. I mean, you've obviously got Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas in the older class. You've got the freshman class, which is depleted a little bit from where it was, but it's, you know, it's still got Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, KK Smith, which is still a pretty good trio of players. You've also, that's 5. You've also got the 3 transfers gives you 8, and then 2 early enrollees. They're going to have better depth and depth of talent right now in the spring than they had during the fall.
Yep.
In my opinion. Yep. And then of course they'll add Logan Saldate in the summer. So the receiver position in a hurry with a really strong portal class and a really strong freshman class because I think you nailed it, Ryan. This freshman class, these early enrollees, these are 2 guys that show up day one at Notre Dame and have the talent and the bodies and the game to compete for playing time right now. Even more so, I think, than last year's freshman class. Like I think Cam and Micah Gilbert are more physically advanced than anybody in last year's freshman class outside of maybe Jaden Greathouse. Like Rico Flores, you know, is a strong kid and all that, but he doesn't have their athleticism. He doesn't have their length. He doesn't have the big playability they had. He had the physique, but not the game. Greathouse had the game and the body. These 2 kids have the game and the body. Braylon James didn't have the game yet. And KK Smith was hurt, and Jordan Faison wasn't here in the spring. So, this group to me, this is a make an impact right away group of receivers with Cam Williams. And Cam Williams will get a lot of the attention, rightfully so. He's a dude. I believe you and I both had him as a 5-star. You had him as a 5-star as well, correct? But Micah Gilbert's another guy that you and I like a lot. That is physically going to show up and be one of your more physically imposing receivers the minute he steps foot on campus.
Yeah, no, he's a massive kid. So there's a good chance that either one of those players could play themselves into reps. It's great to be in it's really nice to be in the situation though, where you don't need them to be necessarily that guy, at least in year 1. If Cam Williams comes in year 1 and he's that guy, right? Like a freshman All-American, or he's a guy that's pushing for playing time and maybe outplays Chris Mitchell in the, at the Z position, and he becomes the starter at some point. That's great. That means that Cam Williams is everything that we thought he could be at the end of the day. If Micah Gilbert comes in and by the end of the season, it's like, hey man, like Bo's a good player, but like also, he needs to get some reps there, right? Like he's too good to keep off the field, or he's a guy that you put in the slot in certain situations and move him around a little bit. That's great. That's because Micah Gilbert is too good to keep off the field. But ultimately, Notre Dame hasn't been in this position for the last couple of years. They have accumulated depth from the veteran perspective. I mean, I already talked about Jaden Harrison coming in as the return man, potential, slot gadget type player. You talk about Bo Collins at the boundary. You talk about Chris Mitchell at the Z. You have that now combined with Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas. Like you're cooking now, man. Like you're in a good spot from a depth perspective. And it's not just a depth for numbers perspective either. It's a depth as in you feel good about it. Like you feel good about Jaden Thomas being on the field. You feel good about Jaden Greathouse being on the field. You feel good about Bo Collins. You feel good about Chris Mitchell. You feel good about Jordan Faison. You feel
KK
good about these
Smith.
guys getting reps. Yeah, I keep forgetting about KK.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Ryan, like, I think you right there, you nailed why I'm so confident this receiving core is going to be really good this year. Because it's not all dependent on, if Deion Colsey's not healthy this year, I don't know that they're going to have a boundary receiver.
Right.
You know, if this guy doesn't, if Chris Tyree doesn't step up this year, who's your slot? I mean, who's your difference maker in the slot? You know what I mean? Like,
Big play
if
guy,
Tobias
yeah.
Merriweather doesn't step up this year, who's your outside guy that can stretch the field? You didn't have one, and we saw when Tobias started getting less reps that their vertical presence disappeared. It was gone. You know, and for all his woes, that's the one thing that he brought that he made teams have to respect that. And so this year you don't have that. I mean, the 10 guys that can play right now, is there a single guy? Like last year, part of that group was like Matt Salerno. And is there anyone right now that you look at and say, I don't think that guy is physically or his game is advanced enough to play? But if that guy plays this year, you're in trouble. Is there a single guy in the 10 that we just talked about that if he's playing and it's part of the rotation this year, like, ooh, that's not good.
Right.
There's a couple last year, like if this guy's playing 20, 30 snaps a game, that probably means something bad happened somewhere else. That's the thing about it is that's that great competition, but also the depth to where you're much better positioned because someone's going to get hurt for whether it's for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. It's going to happen. It happens everywhere. Someone's going to get hurt. Someone's not going to live up to expect. I mean, that's just how that's football. That's true at Notre Dame, Ohio State, Bama, Washington, Texas, Georgia, everywhere.
Yep.
And do you have the ability to replace that and continue rolling with what's behind it? Last 2 years, when you'd lose guys or guys like when Lorenzo Styles didn't play up to expectations, that really hurt the receiving core early in 2022. When Jaden Thomas went down this year and then Jaden Greathouse got hurt a week later, that decimated this receiving core that already didn't have Bo Collins. Now, you don't want to lose those 3 guys, but if you do, you've got much more impactful, experienced talent ready to step into those roles because of what you have, not just with the transfers, but also you have 2 freshmen to me that they don't have to play, Ryan, based on this roster, but there's a lot of years where these kids would have come in and been like, how do you keep that kid off the field?
Right.
And that's a great place to be. And again, if you don't bring it every day, if you're Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey or Chris Mitchell or Bo Collins or Jaden Harrison or Jordan Faison or KK Smith or anybody else, if you don't bring it every day, you run the risk of getting passed up by Cam Williams or Micah Gilbert. That's where that's where Bama's been for years, Ryan. That's where Georgia has been for the last 4 or 5 years. That's where a lot of these top programs are, that if you don't bring it, okay, that's cool. Step aside because this kid over here is hungry and he wants it. And that's what gets me so fired up about where the depth chart is right now, Ryan. And you nailed it at receiver. Like, all these kids can play. All these kids are ready to play right now.
Yeah.
That's going to make for great competition, man. Great competition.
It is. It is. It's an exciting group to watch because I think there's a lot of different possibilities for rotations and alignments and, you know, what the snap share is. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be fascinating.
Real quick, Ryan, I think you just kind of hit on something else too. That's one thing that is important about this group of early enrollees is last year's class had a lot of guys who were more ideally suited for the slot, but you kind of had to play them outside. The nice thing is you're bringing in 2 guys that to me can flat out play outside. Now, I think Micah Gilbert can play all 3 positions in this offense. And I think you can make a case that Cam Williams could as well. But they're longer, taller, vertically oriented outside guys, and that's something Notre Dame needs an influx of. And if they weren't that, then that's a lot of pressure on Chris Mitchell to be that guy, or Jaden Greathouse to be that guy, because if they're not, then you're stuck without that. So I think that's the other thing too, is you were talking about this just now. The complementary nature of the makeup of this room is a lot better than last year, because you could argue that outside of Deion Colsey and Tobias Merriweather, every other receiver that was in the rotation last year could argue that his best position was slot.
Yeah.
And that's not the case anymore with the makeup of this new look. this new look receiving room.
Even some of Tobias's biggest plays last year were from the slot as well. So
yeah, the
slot
NC
position was
State
a very
play,
oriented team.
the Pitt big play, the touchdown, the long post against Pitt was you're correct. His first touchdown of his career against Stanford was from the slot. So you are correct.
It was.
You are correct.
Yep. It's definitely a different feeling, the wide receiver position, and I'm interested to see if Cam or Micah Gilbert are able to crack that rotation. Offseason will obviously be dependent. Health will be dependent. And we'll see what happens moving forward. Tight end, not too long of a conversation here. Jack Larson obviously is an early enrollee there. Jack is a player that is going to be in a tight end room that just not going to need him to make an early impact. I mean, especially when Mitchell Evans gets back, because when Mitchell gets back, you're going to look at a 3-man tight end room of, at least at the top from the rotation, of Mitchell Evans, Eli Raritan, and Cooper Flanagan, which is pretty good, man. It's pretty good. So I think that Jack, the biggest thing for me, Brian, this offseason and moving into the future from year one is he brings a different variable that you don't have a ton of at the tight end room anymore. I mean, he's more of like that Kane Barang type of style as far as like being more of a detached movement-based player that you thought that maybe he could be. But I really think that Jack this offseason and moving into year one, it's just about physical development. I mean, I saw him listed at like 230 pounds on the roster. I don't know how accurate that is, but I know there were times, at least junior and senior year, where he was more in the 215 range, somewhere in that ballpark. So he isn't a big kid. And although he the weight will be, he's going to be limited as far as like how much good weight you can put on his frame, because he's not the longest guy of all time. He's not the tallest guy of all time. But I think just physical development this offseason is going to be big for him, putting on good weight, getting ready to acclimate to the surroundings, to the tight end room. Because year one impact, I don't see a ton for Jack Larson potentially, but it's more about setting yourself up for the long term this offseason.
It is, Ryan, but there's also a little bit of a concern that you're going to have to, as a coaching staff, everything you said is 100% correct. I don't disagree with any of it. I just want to look at the roster for a second. Mitchell Evans is out this spring. Kevin Bauman, he'll be back. How long will he be back? Eli Raritan and Cooper Flanagan. So he's going to get a decent amount of reps this spring, which is going to help him learn the offense and get acclimated. You're going to kind of have to, as a coaching staff, hopefully you don't have to play him, but you need to make sure he's getting as ready as he can in the weight room and knowing the system, because you've got Mitchell Evans and his injury history, Eli Raritan, his injury history, and Kevin Bauman and his injury history. Right? You're not that far away from Jack Larson being your number 2 or number 3 tight end as a freshman. That's not where you want to be. That's not, you didn't recruit Jack Larson to come in and play day one, but they're going to have to at least pay a little extra attention just to make sure that mentally and physically he's ready to play in case that time is called. But to your point, Ryan, in a perfect world, Jack's a guy that you save a year. He doesn't play. I mean, he'll play some blowout, but you don't want him to lose a red shirt this year. You don't, because as you mentioned, he needs a lot of body development and physical growth. Like Eli Raritan's not a 5-year guy. He now I may not have thought that as a freshman, but looking at it now, Mitchell Evans is not a 5-year guy. Jack Larson can be a 5-year guy. Now he's got the ball skills to help you right now, but if you're putting Jack Larson in the game, it's probably going to be to block and things like that. And like you said, he's 215, 220 pounds. You know what I mean? Is where he's been most of last year. So you don't want to have to do that. But I do get a little bit nervous when I look at the numbers at tight end, and when you consider the injury history of so many of those guys, that I really hope Jack's not thrust into a situation where they have to play him this year. So that's something you have to keep in mind for the spring. But to your point, the ideal situation for Jack is that he gets to have a year of just pure development. Build up your body, learn the game, get a ton of reps on the scout team, really put in that work going against Jalen Sneed and going against Jack Kaiser and going against your first team defense. That's going to be a great learning lesson, learning period for Jack Larson. And then maybe a year later, when Bauman's gone and Mitchell Evans is gone, now he's in a much better position to kind of step in and be that number 2 or 3 guy and battle for that as a sophomore. But I really don't want to I really want him to be able to save that year of eligibility. And for all the reasons that you mentioned, I just, man, am I off base here? I mean, like, that depth chart just makes me nervous with all those injured. the injury history those guys have. It really does, man.
It does. Yeah. No, I understand. I mean, you're always preparing, you're always preparing to try to play, right? Ultimately. But I guess my mindset was more from a best case scenario is that Jack is able to physically develop, is able to mature and be able to kind of take things along in a slower process because he's just body type. He's just not ready.
Yeah.
I don't think right now. Maybe he'll prove me wrong and maybe he'll be 235 ish, by the time fall camp comes around, and maybe he could do a Davis Sherwood type of role year one and be able to be kind of that movement based H-back type of dude. It's possible, but ultimately I think that it's best case scenario for Jack is to be a little bit patient with him because I think that long term that would pay the biggest dividends for this program potentially. Offensive lineman, I think, is another spot where we look at and say development would be nice, right? I mean, because you have the three. I would say if Gerby Lambert was able to be an early enrollee, this might be a little bit of a different conversation because maybe Gerby is a guy that can come in and can give you a little bit of competition as far as actually potentially earning a spot on the offensive line, potentially, especially with the full off season of physical development, weight room training, and acclimation as far as coaching and technique. But the three offensive linemen that you have coming in, I would say 2 out of the 3 are in need of serious physical development. One is Anthony Knapp that we've talked about a ton, right around 270, 275 pounds. He's not the biggest kid in the world. He needs to develop into his frame, offensive lineman out of the state of Georgia, out of Roswell, Georgia. The other one, Brian, is Styles Prescott, who listed 6'6", around 270 pounds. He's another kid that just needs to add a little bit mass. He's a little bit skinny right now. He has a frame to put on the weights. And I'll be interested to see how much good weight he puts on in a short amount of time. I would say Peter Jones out of the 3 is physically probably the most ready to play day one at Notre Dame. But regardless, we know that offensive linemen in general are usually brought along a little slow, unless you're just a dude, unless you're a guy that just you can't keep off the field. But usually they're about, let's get that weight room strength going. Let's get that physical development going. Let's learn the technique that Coach Rudolph is going to be preaching to them. 2 out of 3 of the guys I think are just need of serious physical development. And just let's add competition to that room. Let's improve that depth overall. But I don't think you're looking at this 3-man class and saying that either one of them is fighting for a starting job year one.
Sure.
But the quality of depth and the quality of making the room better, I think that they could certainly bring that very quickly.
What a difference a year makes. I mean, the biggest guy that Notre Dame's adding right now is Peter Jones, who on the Notre Dame roster is listed at 6'5", 292. The next 2 guys is Styles is listed at 6'6", 273, and Anthony Knapp's listed at 6'4", 266. Compare that to last year. Here's the size of last year's, the current size, and a couple of them are actually down a few pounds. Christopher Tarrick, 6'5", 327. Charles Jagasol, 6'7", 326. Sam Pendleton, 6'4", 309. Selvin Absher, 6'8", 318. And even Joe Otting is 6'3", 288. So, I mean.
I was happy to say Otting's weight seems to be a lot up. That was good to see.
So, it's a different looking group than last year. It's a much more athletic group, Ryan, as you look at it. Guys that can move and all that. But to your point, I mean, Styles Prescott not only needs time to develop his body, as you and I have discussed a lot, his game needs a lot of work. I love the tools that he has, but nobody landed Styles Prescott thinking he's going to come in and play as a freshman. The only guy that, to me, Peter Jones could be that guy, but he's got a very big, long depth chart ahead of him of similar players that he's going to need some time to develop as well. And he'll probably be making a transition from tackle to guard. Ryan, that's something that you and I talked about earlier is I'm curious to see where these guys play. Is Joe Rudolph like Harry Heastand? Because the way Coach Heastand was, he would always start these kind of kids at tackle just to get them some work outside. And then, because he knew he had time, these kids redshirt and we'll get them some work at tackle and then we'll move them inside. We saw that with so many kids from the past. Do they do that with Peter, or do they just say, hey, you're an inside guy and let's get that work right now? I am curious to see that. But, Peter's the only one that physically is ready to come in right now. And he's got a pretty technically sound game too, Ryan. But again, there's just so many guys in front of him right now that he's going to have to be really, really good. But to your point, if you're trying to get in a too deep a guard, if you're Ty Chan, if you're Christopher Tarrick, if you're, Sam Pendleton and these guys that are trying to fight for either a starting job or to get into that too deep, he's another guy that he's going to look the part the second he shows up on campus. I've seen Peter up close and personal. That's a good look, broad-shouldered, barrel. I mean, that's a good-looking kid, and he's going to put in the work. So he's another guy. But the expectation is this class of the early enrollees will not make an early impact. But what it does do, Ryan, is Notre Dame is going to have a really good, legitimate 3 deep this spring. And as long as they can stay healthy, this may be one of the few years we've seen where you can actually have 2 separate lines in the spring game, because normally half the guys have to play both sides. And you're going to have 17, 18 offensive linemen potentially this spring, which could make for a very interesting situation. Now, just a couple notes. We have talked a lot about who is and isn't going to be on the roster. Andrew Kristofic is not listed on the spring roster. So we kind of expected that. And we haven't got official word, but they did release the roster today, and he is not on it. So that's an expected move, but it's at least worth mentioning right now.
Sure. Yep. Well, definitely worth mentioning as we're working through the offensive line talk. Again, Peter Jones is a guy that I think is going to have a fun time in the weight room because he throws around a lot of weight for people that don't know much about Peter. And I'm really interested to see how much good weight. Because the other thing about Styles is that I think Styles has the frame to add a lot of weight, but I don't want to pack it on too quick. I do not want to pack it on too quick on his frame. I think that would be, I don't think that would be a great decision. So I'm hoping that they just kind of ease him along pretty, almost like the Emil Wagner thing a little bit, right? Like they've just been kind of bringing Emil along pretty slowly, but he's been steadily adding weight, and he's in the 280s now. It's like, let's keep getting that frame ready and keep getting it, working up quickly. So,
I think he's got to be a 2-year guy, Ryan. That's my plan for him. Unless his body just naturally adds good weight, and because like the fear is if you put too much weight on a kid like Styles right away, he gets tight and loses that quickness. And if he loses quickness, what good is he? You know what I mean? Like you don't want to have that kid lose that. So he's always been a guy that I love. I love the upside, but I've always kind of viewed him as a 2-year player. Let's get him to 2026. Maybe he earns a 2-deep role in 25, depending on what the roster looks like. But really the goal is to get him ready for 2026 to then compete then. And that's my ultimate goal for him. I mean, because by then, who knows? Charles Jagusah might be leaving at that point in time. You know what I mean? Depending on how he develops the next couple of years. Tosh will be gone by then. So that to your point, both him and Knapp, to me, both are guys that I want to see. I have the same concern with Anthony Knapp. I don't want to see a lot of weight get put on these guys too soon. If it happens naturally, it happens naturally. But those are both 2-year guys for me before I'm ready to start talking about them being in the rotation. And Notre Dame is in a great place, Ryan, where they don't have to speed that up. They can take their time with those 2 guys.
Offensive line, baby. They're always going to have depth at that spot. It's about now developing that talent to a higher level that we've seen outside of Joe Alt, obviously. But yes, offensive line is in a good spot. Folks, we're going to get to the defensive early enrollees. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter conversation because, as we said, 9 out of 15 are on the offensive side of football, which means only 6 are on the defensive side of football. But we're going to get to that next. Before we do, hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening to us live on YouTube, hit that notification bell as well, so you know when the next show is coming up. You could also, if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe there, as well as 5-star reviews. Make sure you leave a nice little note on there about how much you love the show in that 5-star review, and go to boards.irishbreakdown.com as we continue to navigate you all through the offseason with the latest recruiting and team intel. We're going to talk defensive early enrollees next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. So, Brian, there are 6 early enrollees on the defense side of the ball. 4 of them are on the defensive line. So that's going to be a little bit more of an in-depth conversation. You have Logan Thomas, Cole Mullins, you have Bryce Young, and you have Sean Sevillano, all early enrollees for the Notre Dame class on the defensive side of the ball on the defensive line. It's a very interesting group. There's a mixture of things to work through here and working through everyone individually, because there are tools obviously to work with here. There are a couple spots that we'll talk about that are a little bit loaded as far as the depth at certain spots, like defensive tackle, for instance, is going to be a pretty quality depth perspective going into the 2024 season that we'll get hit on here.
Although, Ryan, with some news that is breaking now, I'm actually working on an article about this. I have confirmed with a source that Gabriel Rubio will not be with the team this spring. He is not only not with the team, he's not in school. So he is dealing to what I've been told, and this is a direct quote, personal matters. So he is back home dealing with that. So that's one fewer player to deal with. I'm going to have a story on that here very soon. That's one fewer player to deal with, but it's also an opportunity for some younger players to have an impact, and including one, and we'll get to this in a second, but Sean Sevillano is the one guy that's most impacted by that in the freshman class, because what Rubio brought you was a big, strong body, 306 pounds, very powerful. And, Donovan Heinisch is a very good player, but Donovan brings a completely different type of skill set. So it's what I'm referring to, same with Jason Onye, what I'm referring to is who on the roster can replace that beef aspect of what Gabriel Rubio brought to the table this spring. And the first two guys that really pop in my head are Devin Houston and Sean Sevillano, who's an early enrollee and part of this early enrollee class. So that's a little bit interesting as well, Ryan, when you look at that. That actually kind of broke while the show was going on. So I just wanted to add that little nugget there as well.
Well, and we can start with the defensive tackle position, because I think that's a smooth transition, is that you have front line coming back, Riley Mills and Howard Cross. You mentioned Jason Onye coming back, who played a decent amount in 2023. They also have Donovan Heinisch that played a good bit, Devin Houston, Armel Mukum. Even if Gabriel Rubio ends up not being with the team in 2024, depending on what happens, still pretty quality depth, man. You still have a lot of good looking bodies in that interior defensive line room. Sean Sevillano, though, does bring, and I think that this is where the conversation starts, he brings a completely different body type than what you have in that room right now, though. You have, for the most part, longer guys, a little bit of the bigger frame guys, talking about the Riley Mills of the world, talking about the Jason Onyes of the world, talking about Devin Houston, Armel Mukum, even to a degree, as far as guys that are a little bit longer, a little bit taller guys. And then you have the maybe slightly undersized guys, the quick interior penetrators. That is the Howard Crosses. That is the Donovan Heinisch. So Sean Sevillano, but they don't have anybody that is, and I saw this on the roster that he was listed at like 6'1" and 320 something pounds. He's a big old boy, man. He's a big old boy.
339, Sean.
Oh, 339.
Or Ryan.
That's
Sean
right.
was listed at 339. 6'1", 339.
Hey,
that
man.
Big boy.
On the National Signing Day, he said his coach compared him to Cameron Lewis Nick's Irish chocolate. Well, that's some Irish chocolate right there, baby. It's 339 pounds.
Yeah.
It's a big old boy.
That is a big boy.
I think that the immediacy is that you add, you just mentioned, Gabriel Rubio not with the team this offseason, into the spring, which means one less body that supplements that body that you lost. And also, it gives you a big road grader, big old dude that you don't have a ton of in the room. I mean, your biggest guy outside of them is who? Riley Mills, who's like, what, 306, 305, somewhere in that ballpark. I mean, he's a big guy, but he's not like 339 is a little bit of a different, area code, to put it for lack of a better term, right? So you get the immediacy of big boy inside, quality depth in there. And if you've ever talked to Sean Sevillano, Ryan, which we've had him on the show a couple of times, it's a confident kid, man.
Yep.
At worst, I'm talking about at worst this offseason, that kid's going to compete his butt off. He's going to come in every single day. He's going to knock some heads, man. He's not afraid of competition, which you love to see, obviously, at that position.
And the other thing too, Sean, Ryan, you've talked about this. Sean Sevillano is strong. I mean, strong. He's going to bring, I'm ready to play right now, attitude and strength. Now, does he have the foot quickness? Does he have the agility? Does he use his hands well enough? Because he to me strikes me as a little bit of a shorter limbed guy. I could be wrong on that. He's not super long guy. So hand technique's gonna be important. For the shorter your arms are, to me, the better you have to be a master of your craft, because you just can't get away with just like Jason Onye can kind of be sloppy with his technique, but if he can lock out, you're not getting on him, right? Sean Sevillano has to be a little bit more technically sound. So all those things are going to be question marks. How quickly can he do that? But here's the thing. That's why being an early enrollee for a kid like that is super important. Because you say he's got to reshape his body. He's got a 6-month head start on that because he's an early enrollee. Hey, he's going to have to really enhance his hand play. Cool. They get 15, 14 practices in the spring game to work on that, plus other type of drills. He gets to be around Riley Mills and Howard Cross and guys like that in order to that can also, I mean, it's not just the 14 practices without Washington and Coach Derrico. It's also you get time spending with Howard Cross and Riley Mills. Like if I'm Sean Sevillano, I'm spending every waking second I can picking Howard Cross's brain. Because if you could ever develop the hand play and overall how he plays the game as Howard Cross at your size, you're going to be a dude, you know, as far as just like from a technical standpoint. So those are all things that for him, being an early enrollee from that standpoint and a body reshaping standpoint, because 339, we laugh about it, but I don't know that he's going to be able to. I mean, I'd like to see a little bit of that come off, to be honest with you.
At least taken off and then supplement him with good weight, right? If that is the body type that he has, you know, I agree. I think
even if he's like 335, just a little bit firmer, 335.
Yes. And he's a worker, man. So I'm sure that he will do everything it takes in order to take off the weight that he needs to put on the good weight back and to fight for playing time this offseason. So defensive tackle just got a little bit more interesting and interested to see how Sean Sevillano works into that this offseason, the rotation, and able to take advantage. Because, Brian, we're also counting on a couple young guys, right? I mean, Devin Houston, Armand Mukum, only going to be second-year players. If you're them, you need to hold off that young cat because he's coming in and he's going to compete, man. So the depth is going to be very interesting at defensive tackle, especially if they are without Gabriel Rubio in the 2024 season, which is to be determined, obviously. Defensive ends, and I guess we can break this up maybe into Viper and a big end conversation because we have a couple guys that are. I'm interested to see the Cole Mullins thing because Cole Mullins, 239 pounds. I think he was listed on the roster. He is the size of a Viper, but he does, I think, kind of work also a little bit of a big end game to him as far as being a super physical dude, can work through contact, run setter, edge setter. I imagine that he will be with the Vipers early on, especially at that weight, which you would imagine also that him and Logan Thomas will be together. Mm-hmm. And what was the one position, Brian, that we've been talking about that you need to be more productive this upcoming season? You need to find some answers there. It's the Viper position. Yeah. Big end position in 2024 or 2023. It's pretty good, man. Javonte Jean-Baptiste did a lot of good things for you. You had some good rotational players in there. The interior defensive line was fantastic pretty much the entirety of the year. Viper position needs to be more productive. And now you have adding Logan Thomas and hopefully I imagine now a fully healthy Cole Mullins coming off of his injury, the preseason injury this past year. So you're going to have two young cats that are going to be eyeing for playing time, hopefully, at the Viper position.
And then obviously with Cole, hopefully he's healthy enough to play this spring. That's another thing I'm curious about, Ryan. I'm not quite sure where he is on his recovery from the broken leg that he had, but if they could get him in practice, that, like you said, that certainly helps. And figuring out, like, is he a guy that plays one of the two, or do they try to develop him into a guy that can be a swing, a guy that can do both? I'm going to be very interested to see that. And then, of course, Logan Thomas. I mean, I don't expect either one of those guys to play as rookies just for different reasons. Cole because of the lost year and getting healthy. Logan because he's – what did they list him as, Ryan? Let me find the roster here real quick. 196. Like 196. Yeah, it was really light. It's like he's going to need time to grow his body, talented as he is. But again, that's why being an early enrollee is so important because you're going to have an extra 6 month in the strength program where you're not just having to rely on, okay, well, they sent me the program and now I got to do it. Now you're in that weight room. You're doing the things that with them, directly with them that are really important. And it's good for him. Can he get up to 215, 220, 25 pounds by the fall? Because he's a guy that, Ryan, that when you look at the body type, you're like, yeah, this guy's not going to play as a freshman. But then you're like, this guy is a freak athlete. Like, did you see that play? Somebody put it on social media, but they ran a sprint out away from him in a game this year, and he sacked the quarterback on a dead sprint from behind. And they tracked him to like some insane miles per hour coming off the edge. Like, this kid is a freak. And the thing I'm excited about is he proved it at a really high level of football this year. But you can even watch,
great year.
But even still, right, here's what gets me excited. You watch him play, he doesn't have a clue what he's doing still, really, from a technical standpoint. And a lot of it, I mean, he's just so much longer and more explosive than anyone else on the field. Imagine what this guy's going to be like when he actually gets coaching. And so for him, Getting that 15 practice head start, getting a 6-month head start in the weight room is going to determine how quickly he can help you, because athletically, he can help you right now. Body type wise, he's going to need some time.
I'm curious to see if either one of those guys, even if they're not, part of the rotation in 2024, if they're not special teams players.
Mm-hmm.
Because I look at Logan Thomas, Brian, I'm just like, punt block, please. Like, yes. I look at Cole Mullins and I'm like, why can't he be on every coverage unit? I like him in a straight line, and he's 240 pounds. Like, he can run down and cover a kick, right? He can cover a punt. So I'm very interested to see if either Logan Thomas or Cole Mullins, if they neither are part of the rotation, if they're a part of the special teams conversation, which there's going to be several. I mean, even talking about just the full class in general, but like there's going to be some defensive players that I think you're just going to be like, okay, maybe he's not a starter this year, but might just be too good to keep off of special teams, man. Like, I mean, I could see Kingston on special teams. I could see Bodie on special teams. I could see Teddy Rizak on special teams. Like, I could see a bunch of these guys contribute in that area, which is obviously a deeper part of the conversation. But yeah, I think we're on the same page in the sense that it's nice to add competition and talent to that room, obviously, because you need to be more productive at Viper in 2024. But I don't think that either one of those players, for different reasons. I actually think that Cole Mullins would have been I think that Cole Mullins, if healthy, can potentially help you if you need him in 2024, because he does a lot of the dirty work, a lot of the little things, right? Like, technically he's pretty good, and he played in a really good talent rich area, and he was very productive there. And I think that you look at him and say, like, if he could give you 5 to 10 reps a game, 10 reps a game, I think that that's possible there. Logan Thomas is a very interesting commodity, because I could see him just year 1 to year 2 at Notre Dame just balloon, and he's up to like 235 pounds, and he's your best pass rusher, and you can't keep him off the field. It's going to be fascinating to see what they do with him year 1, as far as red shirt, not red shirt, play him on all special teams because he's just too athletic to keep off there. Maybe in a couple of the blowouts, you get him in pretty early to just get him some pass rush reps and develop that aspect of his game. I'm very curious to see what they do with Logan Thomas, because I have no idea what they're going to do. I mean, he's not going to play on a full-time basis at 196 pounds at defensive end, obviously. I mean, that's like a no-brainer. But can you find some type of role for him on your team? I mean, he's such a good athlete. It's possible.
Let me ask you this, Ryan. Like, the way he runs, if he's just 220, he can't do what Jalen Sneed did and what Maris Leofau did as a pass rusher. Like, that's the thing, is like, if he doesn't have to gain a ton of weight to find a role, because I would argue, I'd be willing to bet you his 40 time isn't that much different than theirs. When you look at his track times and some of the things we've heard about him and what they've done, he can flat out run, and he's really first step explosive, which is important as well. So again, to your point, he's going to need a lot of weight to become a defensive end, a Viper, you know what I mean, type of edge player. He doesn't need 50 pounds to become a guy that you're like, that guy's just too explosive not to be on our punt block team. Like, you know what I mean? Like, to your point, like, okay, he's 220 pounds. You're telling me you can't have that guy sprint right up the middle and jump with his incredibly long arms and leaping ability, right? Yeah. You can't have that guy find like a third down niche role where he's one of your most explosive players. That's the point.
He blocked several, and I have something to say in the chat in a couple minutes, by the way. I know we're not supposed to react to the chat, but just some stupidity that's going on in the chat, which is hilarious.
Don't react to it. Don't react to it.
I'm sorry. Because Deuce Knight didn't have an Alabama offer before yesterday. My bad, guys.
I just said don't react to it.
I'm sorry. It's just so dumb. It's just
this really, is why I tell you to turn the chat off.
I know. I'm sorry.
You and Vince are incapable of not reacting to the chat. I completely get
it. It doesn't make any sense. But regardless, yes, I think that because he blocked several punts and kicks while he was at Paytow and both at St. Edward in Ohio. He had at least 2 or 3 blocks just this year. Could he come in and do that? Absolutely. Like, he could definitely be that niche type of player. There's no doubt about that. And that's why I'm curious. I don't know what the year 1 plan is for Logan Thomas. Do you view him as a kid that, hey man, like, he's probably only gonna be a 4-year player if he's developed properly. So let's get him on special teams. Let's get him on the blocks. Let's get, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know what Notre Dame's vision is necessarily there, but yeah.
But Ryan, this spring, to the whole point, is going to have a big role in determining that. If he, it's going to be about him coming in with the proper work ethic, the proper attitude, really attacking the weight room, taking to the coaching. Like, this next 6 months of development is going to go a long way towards determining if the staff is even going to go into the fall even thinking about him as possibly being a guy that factors into some of those roles, right? I mean, that's going to be a big key for him is if you're that undersized, you got to show him, hey, coach, I'll do whatever I need to do. I'll put in the work. And then it's like, hey, we'll find a role for you. Like maybe you're not big enough to be a first and second down player, but dude, there's some coverage units we can get you on. There's some pump block things that we can have you do. There's some third down nickel stuff that we can have you do. You know, where like Jalen Sneed's the guy there, but you're our number 2. And, you know, or, hey, we're going to put you here in the dime package, maybe something where it's more 3rd and 10, where we really don't have to worry about your size. So that's going to be determined not in August, in my opinion, Ryan, because I think if Logan doesn't have a good spring semester's early enrollee, that may put him too far behind to really make the splash. He'd have to make an even bigger splash in the fall. I think this is going to be a very important time for him, in my opinion.
Yep, it is. And I think it's going to be a very important time for Bryce Young at the big end position, at the field end position. Because, Brian, I think that big end's really interesting right now, right? Because there are several bodies there right now that I'm really excited about. But you are losing a decent amount of production from there, a lot of production from there, actually. You're losing Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Obviously, Nano Safa-Mensah transfers to TCU this offseason as well. The big end position is in a state of flux in the sense that there's going to be a different rotation than last year. It's a lot of big-time talent, man. I mean, they got R.J. Oben from Duke as a graduate transfer. There's guys like Tyson Ford and Brendan Vernon and some Joshua Burnham potentially playing a little bit big end as well moving forward. You got a lot of bodies, but I would say this: if every one of them hit their ceiling in the big end room right now, there might not be one that hits higher than what Bryce Young could potentially bring to the table. So my question is that forget about this, the offseason in general, like could Bryce Young just be too good to keep off the field at 6'6" plus and 245 pounds with the talent he has? I mean, could he be too tough to be too good?
Well, the timing is also interesting, Ryan, because he's walking into a situation where he's going to have a chance to earn playing time because you don't have anything proven there at all. I mean, the only thing you have proven there at that field end position is a guy that's never played it down for your football team. It's R.J. Oben and what he did at Duke. And they're going to use him very differently than how R.J. played at Duke. Now, I think he's going to make a smooth transition and be fine. You're moving Josh Burnham most likely over there. And, you know, but again, I'd still like to see Josh play a little bit of both, to be honest with you, because I'm not sold enough on the other Vipers to be like, let's move Josh Burnham to be a full-time, defensive end.
Yeah, right.
But what you do with him can largely be determined. And look, there's some things R.J. Oben could do as the Viper. Sure. I mean, when you look at how Jordan Patel played last year, now Isaiah Foskey played.
I think he's interchangeable at the Viper position. I think he play Viper or big end. Yep, agreed.
But you can't have those guys be interchangeable if you only have 2 of them at that position. They're going to have to focus on that position. That's where a guy like a Bryce Young, and obviously there's others that are on the roster, but we're focusing on the early enrollee class. That's where a guy like Bryce Young could help. You saw it, Ryan. I mean, 2 things that I think you saw from the video you sent me. Number 1, Bryce Young has the size, natural pop, and athleticism to be a dude at Notre Dame and a guy that can help you right now. 2, Bryce Young still needs a lot of development in certain areas to be ready to play if you're going to go beat a Texas A&M with him, a Florida State with him, a Georgia with him, an Alabama with him, a Texas with him, right? And so that's why being an enrollee is so huge, because he's going to get a 6-month head start on the physical. I mean, could you imagine if they can put like 10, 15 pounds on that kid over the next 8 months? Could you imagine if like he can just get a little bit more juice off that first step? And that could not even be from a strength program. That could just be getting into a better stance and start situation. You know what I mean? And if he starts using his hands even more effectively than he made a huge jump from junior to senior year.
Yeah.
And if he can make another one, that's where it's like, boy, you get a kid like that in early, man. Yes, you can make an impact as not being an early enrollee. I mean, we've seen that. Benjamin Morrison wasn't an early enrollee, and he was a freshman All-American. But when you can get a guy in early like Bryce Young, it's huge, because you get so much more time to work with him, develop him, have him get acclimated to the academic situation, have him get acclimated to your strength conditioning program, having him get acclimated to how your practice structure is. So that way he's not having to worry. But that first week of fall camp, because you know how it is with freshmen, Ryan, that first week of fall camp, you're just like, dude, I'm trying to figure out where I got to line up and stretch.
Zero headlights.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas now you get that out of the way in March, And now when you get to the fall, it's like, okay, here's what we do. Here's what this means. Here's the tempo. Here's what this is. This is how we roll at Notre Dame. And for a guy like Bryce Young, I would argue that nobody on the arguably nobody on the Notre Dame defense is going to benefit more from being an early enrollee. Because like Kingston, to me, is the kind of guy that could show up in July and still play as a freshman.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he's so advanced. Bryce, to me, is a guy that could go from maybe not play a whole lot to, dude, he's playing for you because of that advanced work he's going to get now in so many ways. So I think this period is going to be huge for him. And it's huge for the defensive end depth chart because, to your point, if Bryce is Bryce is ready to play right now, maybe now you could say, hey, we're going to let RJ play a little bit of both. We're going to let Josh Burnham play a little bit of both because now we've got 15 to 20 snaps that we can occupy with somebody else who fits that body type more maybe than those other two guys do because of the incredible length that he brings to the table. So that to me is where him coming in early is going to be huge for him. If that results in sort of a breakout being ready early, that then impacts the entire edge depth chart to me, Ryan. And that's where he can have a huge, huge impact on this football team. And not just as a niche guy, but a downs 1 and 2 guy. Like Logan Thomas, like, can he find a niche special teams role as a freshman? With Bryce, it's like, can this guy become a regular as a freshman? And the spring is going to give him a chance to learn enough to where maybe in the fall he could become that kind of guy.
Well, my prediction is that he does. I think that Bryce Young is going to be hard to keep off the field. I think that he is going to play a lot of football because I think the key things here, Brian, is that we already talked about it a ton. You can't teach the size and athleticism he has. I think the most impressive part about him is that he's not just a linear player either, right? Working in a straight line. Some of the bend that he was able to show me in San Antonio is like, dude, it's just not natural that a guy as big as he is and as high cut as he is, as tall as he is able to drop his hips and turn a corner the way that Bryce Young is able to do, man. It's pretty special. But the other thing that I thought was the most impressive part of him in San Antonio is as he's working through these drills and he's learning new techniques with hand usage and everything, he is one of the 1 or 2 players in the defensive line group for the East that was off to the side working on his hands in between drills. And that stuff matters to me, man, because there's some guys that are the son of an NFL Hall of Famer that might be a little bit entitled, might feel like they don't have to work. They're just physically gifted. They can just go through the motions and they'll play. Bryce Young strikes me as a kid just by observing him just off to the side. Because what's the saying, Brian? Like you show what type of worker you are when people aren't watching you, right? Like when no eyes are on you. Nobody was watching him off to the side near the goalpost, work on his hands. Little did he know that someone was actually watching him. And I saw him and I'm just like, that kid wants to be great. That kid wants to be really good. I don't think that kid just wants to coast off of his father. Like this isn't a nepotism thing. Like I think that he truly wants to be great. And so I think that this offseason is going to be big for a variety of reasons. You hit on most of them, is that he is going to develop physically and get bigger, faster, stronger. I also think that he's going to take to coaching. Everything that Coach Wash and every of the other defensive line assistants there, the graduate assistants, everything they say, he's going to listen to, man. And I think that he is going to try to put that into his game, and he's going to try to become a more well-rounded football player. So prediction, not a super hot take, because literally we just had a service rank him as a top 25 player and a 5-star recruit. Right? Is that I think Bryce Young plays a lot in 2024, and he ends up being one of the main rotational players at big ends, and maybe starts at some point this year. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
So defensive line, moving back to line, because this one's going to be a much shorter conversation because we got linebacker and we got 1 safety. That's all we got. 4 out of the 6 on the defense side of the ball are on the defensive line, which was the bulk of the conversation. Linebacker, really interesting one. Because I think this is probably one of the ones that you look at and say, maybe best case to early playing time is Kingston Viliamu-Asa. And not necessarily because the linebacker room is in a bad situation. It's not in a bad situation. There's a lot of talent in the linebacker room. You have an inside linebacker, assuming that Jack Kaiser does transition to Will full time. You have the veteran there, but then you still have Drake Bowen. You still have Jaden Ausberry. You have Preston Zinter. There's a lot of young talent in that linebacker room, man. A whole lot. But Kingston Viliamu-Asa, again, might just be too good to keep off the field. I mean, it's possible. He is that type of dude. And I'm interested to see just how quickly. Well, I think he's going to acclimate to everything pretty quickly, but how open of a competition this is this offseason. Because if this is truly an open competition, I think Kingston has every variable that you look like to say he can compete to potentially playing a big role at Mike linebacker or it will linebacker, inside linebacker
Either,
in
yeah.
2024. Yeah.
Well, I think the fact that he could play either adds to that, Ryan. It only if he was like just a Mike and Drake Bowen comes out and has like a monster sophomore off season, and it's like, man, we can't justify taking Drake off the field. I mean, he's got the defense locked down. He's a leader, he's a playmaker, and it's like, we'll rotate Kingston in, but that's all he is. The fact is both Drake and Kingston, but especially Kingston at this point, to me, can play both. Yep. If Drake Bowen and Kingston Viliama-Asa are your two best linebackers, you can play them together. Same thing if it's him and Jalen Sneed, or him and either one of them and Jalen Sneed, or either one of them and Jaden Alsbury. Like, there's a lot of there's not like you're a pure Mike. I think Drake is getting close to that with his size because he's listed at like 244 now.
It's a big boy, man.
Yeah, and he's a thick kid. He might be a little bit more gotta play Mike, but then Kingston can kind of move over to Will. And I think the thing about Kingston is that impressed me more than anything this season, Ryan. I mean, yeah, he got a little bit quicker and a little bit more explosive because he was a year removed from the injury and all that kind of stuff, or another year removed. He was a lot better in coverage, both man and zone coverage, than I thought he was going to be. Because, again, let's be honest, you make first impressions on people, right? And when you see a kid that is a Polynesian kid that's as big as Kingston is, you're going to make kind of, you think Manti, you think Kingston Viliama-Asa, Junior Tualamaka, you think that type of player.
Ray Maluga.
Yeah, but this is a smooth, rangy, athletic, instinctive kid, and you watch him drop into coverage, and I think quarterbacks this year made the same mistake that, maybe I did when I first evaluated him, which is this guy's not going to jump underneath this in cut, and then he does, and he picks it off or breaks it up or whatever. So that's something to me that is why I see Kingston being able to play Will, is because he is rangy, a lot rangier than you'd think if you just kind of go off the body type and his what people of his ethnic background tend to grow into in college, like Mantis and guys like they get like 250 and they blow up and they're thumpers. He can be that, but this kid's got a little. This kid and Manti have very similar juice coming out of high school, because people forget Manti could really run coming out of high school. He was like 225, 230. Manti put a ton of weight on his first couple years in Notre Dame, and he lost a little bit. He lost a little bit of that juice. I don't think they're going to do that to Kingston, and so he could play that Will position effectively. And to your point, Ryan, I'm not as ready to say he's going to play start as a freshman, because there is a lot of talent there. I mean, Jaden Alsbury was a 4.5-star player for me last year, top 50 guy. Drake Bowen was a top 100 guy for me last year. Like, these guys are really talented players as well, and they have a year in the system. And I also graded Preston Zinter out as a 4-star last year. Plus, you have Jalen Sneed and you have Jack Kaiser. So it's not going to be easy, and that just speaks volumes to how well they've recruited this position in recent years. You can lose a Nolan Ziegler. You can move Josh Burnham and Junior Tilamaka to defensive end and still be like, yeah, Kingston's going to have to earn his way on the field. You know what I mean? But to your point, though, Ryan, he's kind of got the talent where it's going to be, I have a hard time not seeing it. And because it's such a young group, I think there's merit to saying, hey, we are going to maybe play more guys. We're not going to put all that burden on Drake. We're going to have Drake and Kingston handle that. And then they can kind of lift each other up. And maybe sometimes against certain teams, they play together. We're not going to put all the burden on Jalen Sneed. We're going to also be using Jaden Alsbury. We're not going to put all the burden on Jack Kaiser physically to play inside all the time. We're going to use these. And so I'm curious to see if Al Golden is going to be more willing to, or whoever the D coordinator, linebacker coach, and all that is this spring, are they going to be more willing to use more depth than they did last year? Like, honestly, 2 years ago, I didn't think they did enough rotating. Last year, I kind of understood it, because you had really good fifth-year guys and then freshmen. Sure. And it's kind of like, do you really want to justify taking J.D. Bertrand off the field against Ohio State to put in Drake Bowen? I don't know that I'm ready to do that yet. I think they missed an opportunity against Central Michigan, but you get my point, right? This year, it's more of like A&M, Florida State, all of it. Play all of them. Play 5-6 guys at linebacker in some certain types of role. Maybe this guy's role is, you're our third down guy. You're our base defense guy. You're our nickel package guy, to where they have very specific responsibilities, but you're getting them all playing time. I would like to see them do more of that, but how Kingston develops this offseason or how quickly he gets comfortable is going to play a role in that. And then if he transitions as quickly as you and I think he is, Ryan, hey, Jalen Sneed, Jaden Alsbury, Drake Bowen, Preston Zinner, Jack Kaiser, you guys better bring it.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're going to find yourselves getting passed up. And again, that just goes back to the original part of the conversation, Ryan. When you're bringing in dudes like this, RJ Oben can't take a day off. Josh Burnham can't take a day off. Drake Bowen can't take a day off. Jaden Alsbury can't take a day off. Jack Kaiser can't take a day off because there are some dudes battling for your job. And if you take a day off, you may find yourself, that may be the day that they pass you up. And that makes a football team better, in my opinion.
Well, we talked about it with the 2023 class a lot. There were a lot of guys in that class that you looked at and said, that guy came from a great program, played against great competition, and no moment was too big for them. I mean, guys like Jaden Greathouse were in that conversation. Rico Flores, Cooper Flanagan was another one. Playing at De La Salle, like he played against some great competition, and it wasn't totally shocking to me. I know we talked about it beforehand that Cooper Flanagan at points developed into a key role player at tight end for Notre Dame. Like that, Kingston is another one of those examples. Playing at St. John Bosco, who was the national champs 2 years ago, was very good again this year, although lost the playoffs to Mater Dei. He played a national schedule at St. John Bosco. Wasn't just playing the best teams in California, which he was also traveling to Hawaii, down to Florida, to play St. Francis Academy in Maryland. Like he was traveling all over the place. So travel, expectation, big games, that stuff's not going to matter to Kingston. So I think that just adds to the potential for him to earn reps early on in his career. But this offseason is going to be absolutely massive because there is a lot of talent that he's going to have to fend off and to get past, overtake.
To your point, Ryan, the first game he plays at Notre Dame is going to be a nationally televised game. That will not be Kingston's Viliama Asa's first nationally televised football game he's going to play in. You know what I mean? It's not even the second nationally televised game that Kingston is going to play in.
Or a plane ride that he's taking to go play a football game. Like, all right, cool,
exactly,
let's go.
Exactly. Because to your point, last year they did play at St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale. They did fly out to California and played Kahuku last season. You know, they did all those things. They traveled all over the place, and beat Mater Dei in the regular season, lost to Mater Dei in the state championship game. So to your point, this is a kid that's played all over the place and and it's one of the advantages of bringing in a kid like that, to be honest with you, Ryan, is because the moment's not going to be too big for him, to your point. And those are all things that you those are all things that you want to be as a football program. That last year they traveled out to Oregon, or played a team. Yeah, traveled out to Oregon to play a team from, I believe, up in Portland area, Central Catholic.
Yeah.
So the moment, like you said, the moment's not going to be too big for him, because if it was, we would have already known. We would have already seen that. And if you evaluated Kingston at all in his career, those are the moments where he was usually at his best. And the kid caught a touchdown pass on offense against Mater Dei in the regular season. I mean,
the playoffs. It was in the playoffs.
Was it a playoff game? Okay.
Yeah, it was a playoff game.
So that was their only
one
score?
Of their few scores. Yeah.
That was, I think it was like 35-7, so that was their only score. So, I mean, that you don't only have to be from that kind of school to be great. Golden Tate came from a nowhere school, like, that didn't play anybody at the time. I mean, if you watch Golden Tate's highlight film, you're like, that guy's playing against like midget football guys. And I don't know, what do they call midget football now? When I was a kid, it was called midget football, like little kid football, pee-wee football, whatever. Yeah. Pop Warner, whatever it's called. Like, he was playing against guys like I wouldn't recruit to D3 schools. I mean, some guys are that way. You can still be great at that, but it helps with where playing against the competition he plays with more than anything, Ryan, is it helps with the transition for kids, I think, when you play that type of competition. Because you have played in front of big crowds, you have traveled all over, you have played on national TV, and Kingston's going to be ready to do that, in my opinion. There's no question.
And then he went to San Antonio, and by the second practice, he was the leader of that team, which again makes no mistake. And then West won that game for what that's worth as well, and Kingston was a big part of that victory, obviously. So
he just spent the whole game in the backfield. It seemed like it was ridiculous.
Nuts, man. It's nuts. Yeah, he's He's one of the most instinctive players I've ever seen on the high
Mhm.
school level. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, honestly, he's more instinctive than a lot of college linebackers I'm evaluating for the NFL draft. Like, he just sees the game in an advanced level. Last player defensively that will be an early enrollee, safety Kennedy Urlacher out of Chandler High School in the state of Arizona. This will be an interesting one, Brian. I personally didn't think that Kennedy took this step forward as a senior that I wanted to, but he is coming into a situation where safety is a major question mark out of his after Xavier Watts. As far as the depth, I mean, they obviously landed a grad transfer safety. They have a couple young guys in Adon Schuler, Ben Minnick, who are very talented football players on the come up. But Kenny Urlacher has an interesting opportunity to maybe fight for reps in what is a still an up in the air safety rotation right now in 2024.
The big thing for me with Kennedy is, to your point, Ryan, I don't know that I didn't see him make a jump or not. I just didn't see a lot of him as a senior. There just wasn't a lot of film for me to evaluate. And the film that I did see was like 99.9% him playing the run and just thumping somebody. It's like every highlight that he had was the same. It was him coming downhill and thumping somebody. It's like, can he play off the hash? I don't know. I didn't really see him do that a whole lot. Can he play man coverage? I don't know. I haven't seen him do that a whole lot. So I think for him, the biggest benefit is just going to be getting into the system and learning it, and us getting a chance to see him flip his hips. I mean, can you count on? Do you need more than one hand to count the number of times we've seen Kennedy Urlacher flip his hips and run vertically? Probably not.
I've seen him make like 3 highlights of pass breakups in my
That's it.
2 years
Because of how they used him. So those are things that we're going to find out a lot about him. Is he who we think he is? And you and I have variances on that, or does he show us something that maybe we didn't see? Because I think Kennedy's going to be a guy that day one, Marty Biagi's just going to kind of gravitate his eyes to him for exactly the thing that we are talking about. The one thing we know that kid can do is fly downhill and smash people. Like, that's the one thing we know he can do. So kickoff coverage, punt coverage, things like that. Can he effectively read routes and jump routes and anticipate routes and take proper angles over the top to play cover 2 or single high? Or can he take proper routes getting underneath an out cut? Or can he take the proper route to jump an in cut and an over route, things like that? I have no idea. And this spring is going to be a great opportunity for that. The thing that I like, Ryan, is I do think this kid's physical, and I think he can run. And he's going to play for a guy that I think has proven himself to be a pretty darn good technical coach at the college level already in Chris O'Leary. So we're going to get a chance to see kind of what he's made of pretty early on. And I mean, he's probably the biggest unknown for me in this class, just because of how little senior film I got a chance to see of him. And so he's probably the guy that I also probably took the biggest gamble on with my grade, because there was a lot of projection to my grade of him because of, well, I think because he did this, he can do this, but I didn't see him do it. And so he's probably the biggest enigma for me of all the early enrollees. Just as I don't know what to expect from Kennedy Urlacher, but the DNA is good. He can run and he can hit. And that's what we know. Outside of that, we'll see. Here's the one thing I can promise you about Kennedy Urlacher in his Notre Dame career, if he stays at Notre Dame for 4 years, and that's true for every kid. Whoever the special teams coach is going to love him. Sure. That's something I feel we can feel confident in. Is he going to be a guy that can help at safety? I think he's got some tools to work with, but honestly, that's a major projection because we just haven't seen him do a whole lot besides run and hit. And you have to do a lot more than that at Notre Dame to be able to play. But I do think there's definitely some tools to work with that I like. There are.
Yeah. There's some tools for sure. I think that you hit on it. I think special teams value at least, and that's why you're always okay with taking a kid like that, every so often or every year, pretty much for the most part, is that you need guys that can be stalwarts on special teams. You need guys that are able to make an impact there. And if you've seen Kenny Urlacher's film over the last 2 years, you know that kid will hit anything that moves. He is a very physical football player. So interested to see if he's able to crack safety rotation early. He's just a special teamer. If he's a redshirt candidate, I don't know. I don't know what the year one impact will be from Kennedy, but it'll be very interesting to watch. Folks, that is your early enrollees for the 2024 class.
Can I ask you a question, Ryan, before we move on to the mailbag real quick?
Sure.
Can you give me a guy, because I thought this was interesting. Can you give me a guy on both sides of the ball that didn't enroll early that you really wished would have enrolled early? Because I have an easy one for me on both sides. I have one guy on both sides of the ball. Man, I really wish that guy was an early enrollee, but I want to hear yours first.
Sure.
Just one guy on each side that you're like, man, I really, really, really wish that guy was able to be an early enrollee.
Yeah. Sure. Gerby Lambert on the offensive side of the football to maybe potentially fight for right tackle reps. And then on defense, Bronte Johnson for the physical development side of things. Yeah.
Same page. Yep. I was wondering if we were going to be on the same. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of options. There's only like 8 guys that aren't early enrollees. Exactly. But those are 2 guys that I felt could have maybe pushed for legitimate playing time. And in Gerby's case, potentially starting job if they were. I mean, they still might. The other thing, too, is I wanted Bronte to get acclimated academically for a semester. And I wanted him to be able with the Notre Dame medical team to recover from that shoulder. But he's another guy that I really felt could have really used more than Carson, more than Leonard, more than Bodie, more than all those guys. He's a guy that could really, and the depth chart could have really used a guy like him for the spring as well. So, same page. We're on the same page there. You can wrap it up now. I just was really curious about your opinion on that one. Who would you really wish could have been here?
Well, folks, that's the early enrollee class for the 2024 Notre Dame recruiting class. We're going to move into a quick mailbag next. Before we do, if you all could just hit that like button for me, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell if you're listening to us on YouTube. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, please 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. Subscriptions as well, wherever you listen to a podcast. And we'll catch you on the mailbag section here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. All right, mailbag time. Time.
So Ryan, we have 15 questions. We're just gonna, unless somebody adds a super chat, we're just gonna stick with those 15 for now, and then just rock and roll. Because I know we're a little crunch for time today, but I did want to get rocking and rolling. But we're gonna start up top.
Wyatt Kerwin with a question. Besides the freshman, who has the most upside at Viper, including the freshman? Who would you like to see start at Viper in 2024 and rotation? What would you like to see?
Well, for me, besides the freshman, who has the most upside at Viper? Boubacar. If he stays at Viper, it's Boubacar.
I would say
my only hesitation, Ryan, was does he stay there? He's currently listed at 236, so it sounds like he's going to kind of for now stay in that Viper range. So if he sticks at Viper, it's Boubacar, and it's not really close. Now that Burnham's on the other side, it's not close. Like Burnham's the only guy that I thought could have been in the discussion for who has the highest upside. Still might have gone with Boubacar. But now that Josh is on the other side, it's Boubacar. If he leaves, I don't know that there's a lot of high ceiling guys left. It would be the freshman. It would be Logan Thomas but that's not in there. That would be my answer for number 1. We're on the same page there, including the freshman. Who would you like to see start at Viper in 2024? I'd like to see Jordan Patelho start and be the guy that we think he can be. That's what I'd like to see. And then Junior and Boubacar can kind of come along. But, people say he battled an injury all year. I mean, okay, maybe he did. Whatever the case may be, he just didn't play very well. And I know that he played well in the bowl game, but I'm kind of like, against Oregon State's backup tackles. Like that doesn't move the needle for me the way he played, the way his bowl performance in the Gator Bowl against South Carolina did. They're going to need him to play better. And so my hope is always that the veteran steps it up and figures it out. But if he ends up kind of faltering again, then my hope is that the light goes on for Boubacar. And that could be the answer no matter what, Ryan, if the light goes on for Boubacar. But I just would like to see Boubacar kind of be a rotation guy early on and then eventually grow into more of a full-time role would be the ideal. But my hope is that Patelho figures it out. But he's one of many guys right now that I'm in show me mode for this season. I'm in 100% show me mode with Jordan Patelho.
Did you know what his weight was on that thing?
It was 250 something. Yeah, it was down. It was down a little bit. It was 250. Let me find it. It was Patelho. It was 258. It's about 7-8 pounds lower. So I wouldn't mind seeing him shave off another 3 to 5 pounds and just trying to get some of that twitchiness back, because he just did not show that at all this year, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, who would I like to see start at Viper? I mean, I'm just kind of out on Jordan Patelho as far as like depending on him right now. I am also in show me mode, so I hope to be pleasantly surprised by Jordan Patelho having a bounce back year and being able to be that guy. But ideally, give me Boubacar and year 2 break out to be that guy, and then you rotate guys like Junior Tuilamaka, Jordan Botelho in would be my ideal. Obviously, that's not totally realistic, but you're asking for what I would like to see, right? So that's what I would like to see. And if Jordan Botelho is able to be that guy, then I will be pleasantly surprised, and then I'll be able to get back on the Jordan Botelho bandwagon. But I need to see it before I believe it at this point.
I got this next one, Ryan. This is for you. This is from Archer452. Speaking of California linebackers, because we were talking about a lot about Kingston Viliama-Asa today. California linebackers from a Catholic school. Is Notre Dame making a push for Madden Faraimo? Emo. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think that's how you pronounce the last name.
Fair, yeah, I think it's Faraimo. So Archer, there was a little bit of conversation early, especially like when they had first offered Madden. There was actually a little bit of interest as well, but he's never visited, and Notre Dame at this point just has a few guys on the board that I think are just a little bit higher and a more of a priority right now. So that isn't a guy that I anticipate being a part of the equation in the end, unless something changes.
Like I know they went out and saw him, or they went out to his high school recently. But, you know, I don't know, like you said, Ryan, if he announces he's going to be coming to campus or something like that soon, then sure. But them going out to his high school was partly about seeing him, but it's also partly about just you're Notre Dame. You've got to get out to J. Sarah Catholic. I mean, that's just because like that's what you have to understand about recruiting this time of year. Sometimes you're going because there's a kid that you like at that school right now. But like right now, if there wasn't a kid on Notre Dame's board from St. Thomas Aquinas, they'd still have to go to St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, there's the regional recruiting. You need to build relationships, even if there's no one on the board for you now. Because if you just ignore a school like Mater Dei or Bosco or St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Francis or J. Sarah Catholic when they don't have a kid you're looking at, and then you want to show up 2-3 years later when they have a kid, well, guess what? Bama's been here every year, even when there wasn't a kid they were on, building that relationship with us. And so that's part of it, too. It's not always just about, we're checking on this kid. But they're going to, even if Madden had told them, hey, I'm not interested, I have no interest in you at all, or they weren't interested in him, they're still going to sit J. Sarah Catholic. I just want people to understand that. But it is good to get out there because then you can have a better feel of, okay, what is this kid's interest level? You know, talking to the coaches. And, you know, so if we hear something over the next month about him setting up a visit, then you know that there's some legit interest there. But to your point, Ryan, until that happens, I'm not, he's not on my board of guys that I'm looking at. I just wanted to make sure people understood that even though they went to his high school, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden he's back at the top of their board. They were going to go to J. Sarah Catholic no matter what. And they should have. It's called good recruiting. It's what you need to do.
Marco Jones and Noah McHale are a couple other California linebackers that Notre Dame is trying to prioritize.
And they're higher on the board, no doubt.
Adam Blair, is Bryce Young the best recruiting win find for Marcus Freeman? Because nobody thought he was going to be this player, including myself. I would say it might be their best evaluation so far, possibly. I don't know, like when it's Bryant Young's son.
Right.
So if you were going to push for Bryce Young, you were probably going to get Bryce Young, ultimately. Was it, though, Adam, a great evaluation? Yeah, it was. I remember when they offered him after his sophomore year, I was like, dude, what is that? Like, that is just a throw-out offer. Like, that is nothing right there. And then he develops into a top 50 player and a 5-star by one recruiting service as a senior. I mean, so I would say that it's probably been their best evaluation so far in their tenure, in my opinion.
Because, like, when they offered him as a sophomore, it was all about the DNA. That was it. You saw this 6'4", string being 190-pound kid that you just thought, you know what? We know who his dad is, and we think he's going to develop. Because the film wasn't all that. I mean, he looked like a kid who'd never really played football before as a sophomore, which is kind of pretty much what he was. I mean, his dad was very much about, because how can a son of a Hall of Fame defensive lineman not be more technically advanced? Because his dad was adamant, I am not pushing my kid to football. If Bryce is going to play football, it's going to be 100% Bryce's decision. And if you know Bryce at all, Ryan, he's a very Notre Dame type of kid, because he's not just like this top 50 recruit that's football all the time. He's a very smart, thoughtful, like interest outside of football kind of guy. Kid. Yeah, which is good. And so when he chose football, it was his choice. And that's important. But when you look at kind of his development, you could start to see as a junior that there was something there. And that's why, I had him as a 3.5-star ranked recruit as a junior, but I had him as a 4.5 upside. And I said, the physical tools are there to be a 5-star, but he's really behind technically. I'm just not quite ready to put him up to 5-star yet. But then boom, as a senior, he grew into it. But when they offered him as a sophomore, it was 100% projection. It was, they saw the body and they said, we think this kid, and I was told this at the time, we think he's going to blow up, physically blow up over the next couple of years. They saw that. Now, I couldn't say that because I never saw Bryce in person. I only saw the pictures, but they saw that. So to your point, and to what Adam asked, it was a great find. The biggest win that to me Marcus Freeman has had so far is Kingston Viliama-Asa, just because they had to beat Ohio State to get him, and they just have not beaten Ohio State for a kid like him in a long time. Would probably be the biggest win. And there are others. I mean, Benjamin beating Jimmy Lake and Nick Saban for Benjamin Morrison was huge. Being able to go down and beat LSU and Ohio State for Christian Gray was huge. Who they had to beat to get Ivan Taylor in the class was huge. But Kingston's
Jane
just
Osbury out of Louisiana.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
There's been a lot of guys like that. But Kingston, to me, because it was Ohio State, that's just not a school that they have had a whole lot of success with against outside of offensive linemen during the Harry Hiestand era. So he kind of got that ball rolling a little bit with some of the wins they ended up having. So I think that was the biggest win. Not that he was necessarily the best player, because I don't have him as the highest ranked player in this class. It's more about who you had to go up against and the odds that people thought going in, do they really have a shot at this kid? Right? I mean, Peyton Woodyard went to the same high school. He is Kyle Hamilton's cousin, and he really barely gave Notre Dame the time of day after his sophomore year. Right? That school just does not look at Notre Dame very much. I think the only kid they've got last 15 years is DJ Morgan. Is the only other kid. So that was a huge win, in my opinion. Easy evaluation, though.
Yes.
Very easy evaluation.
Very easy.
I'm gonna bring this one up. This is not football related, but I do want to address this briefly. If you could go ahead and read that one for me. Ryan.
Kyle Wade says, are there any singular Bible verses or sections that you can recall to help motivate you, get you out of a funk? I've been feeling kind of sucky recently.
So Kyle, number one, do me a favor, shoot me an email at brian@irishbreakdown.com. There's a lot of different things that I would give to you. Number one is I would never, ever, ever read a Bible verse singularly, because you will never understand the context, and you can easily take a Bible verse out of context. For example, one of the most misused Bible verses I've ever seen is Philippians 4:13 that says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And people will take that to mean like I can lift a car if I have the passage in context is no matter what you're suffering through, as long as you have Christ, you can find peace and contentment. And so reading Philippians chapter 4 in the proper context is very helpful. I think if someone who's in a funk, I think the power of prayer is very important. So Ephesians the entire chapter 6 is something that I find very comforting in times of sorrow. And the other thing that I really like to do when I'm when I'm in a funk is read through the Proverbs in the Old Testament. So those are just three off the top of my head, but please feel free to reach out, Kyle, and maybe I can pick your brain a little bit on specifically some of the things you're struggling with, and maybe give you in a more direct, applicable to kind of what you're struggling with passages. But for me, honestly, first of all, be prayerful. God can always help you out directly. But if you want to sit down and really get in his word, which is always a positive, Philippians chapter 4, Ephesians chapter 6, I would say really the whole book of Philippians, to be honest with you, and then reading through the Proverbs are always things that I tend to look at when I'm in a funk and need to get out of that funk. So those are things that I would encourage you to do. And I appreciate you reaching out and asking about that. But shoot me an email, brian@irishbreakdown.com, and we can talk further about it.
Irish Gordy Not says, why were Kingston, Viliama-Asa, and Drake Bowen's final rankings so different? Drake started as a 5-star on one service, finished outside the top 250. Kingston started outside the top 250, finishes as a 5-star.
I don't remember Kingston being outside of the top 250. I don't know who had him outside of the top 250.
I remember in like late hundreds.
He was not a guy that I remember being outside of, but he did climb up the rankings, and I think a part of it, honestly, is going to come down to where he's from. Yeah, because I'm looking at Rivals. The very first rankings that Rivals came out with in 2022, Kingston was ranked 107th, and he's been in their top 100 ever since. So maybe for 247, because some of them actually I really like how Rivals, and sometimes 247 will have this, but they'll actually show a kid's ranking trajectory over time and how it kind of rose over time. So like I'm going back to actually, if you look at it, Rivals or 247 had Kingston ranked 10th overall back in 2022. So he actually kind of dropped off when he was looking at Notre Dame down to 90th, and then he rose back up to 42. A couple reasons why I think there's a difference is you do not want to tick off St. John Bosco by screwing over one of their players. That's a program you need a good relationship with if you're a recruiting service. Yeah. And Drain in Indiana, nobody cares. Right? I mean, if their coach is mad at you because you screwed over one of their players, so what? So I think honestly, that boils down to, and also I think Kingston is a far more advanced player than Drake was. Drake was all about that's a raw, God-given athlete with a lot of talent, right? Playing in a small area, where Kingston did what he did on the biggest stage in high school football. That's the difference to me, honestly, on top of just the relationship part. There's the bias part and all that, but when you watch a kid do what he did at a place like St. John Bosco, if you even think about dropping his ranking, you're just going to lose all credibility. Because even Ohio State fans will jump into this chat and be like, "That's a dude," you know what I mean? Like that's the guy that one hurt. Usually it's like, "Oh, we don't care about this, that, or whatever." It's usually like that. But this one is like you can't screw that one up, in my opinion. You just can't.
Yeah.
So I think those are factors in it as well.
Agreed. We had Andre Tonsil who says, "This is why we have you, Brian and Ryan. Rankings are so subjective because who is doing it?" Yeah. I mean, Andre, it's always subjective. It really is. I think that for me, I think that anybody that does rankings, as long as they have a thorough process and a process that I understand, and they're willing to put their neck out there and say that this is my process and this is what it's going to be, I respect it all the time. That doesn't mean I have to disagree. That doesn't mean I have to agree with it, though, ultimately, right? That's why I always tell people, you can listen to me. I'm glad you listen to me. But at the end of the day, you can do your own homework. And if you have a difference of opinion, you have a difference of opinion on a football player. It is subjective. But I will say that there is a very fine line. And I put this on Twitter maybe a couple weeks ago. There's a fine line between saying scouting subjective, sure, but also people hitting more than they miss means that they're good at it, right? There is still a super fine line between that. So, but I think that the scouting is subjective is absolutely true. I just think as long as the process is good, I can respect it, but you never have to agree, obviously, with every person's scouting opinion.
And Ryan, if I were to ask you who are the three best talent evaluators that you know, and guys that you just think are the best at what they do, there is absolutely positively going to be big differences of opinion with them on certain prospects.
Yeah.
That's the way that it is. It's so to your point, people are always going to miss. People are always going to get them wrong. It's the people that we respect, and you and I, there's some guys, Jordan Reed, we both respect, Dane Brugler, we both respect. You and I have got some chuckles out of Dane Brugler's slow coming around on Joe Alt.
Sure.
But you always felt like, hey, he's just wrong on this one. But there's no bias or anything like that. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I understood it, though, right? There was even someone that was talking about, I did want to see Joe Alt take a jump as far as being a little bit more assertive as a run blocker this year. I agreed with that sentiment. I still think that he undervalued other parts of his game a little bit too lowly, but ultimately, at least I understood his perspective and I understood why there was some concern.
And you knew that he was going to stay in the film room, and if Joe did those things, he would bump him up. And now I think Joe's his number one or number two offensive tackle, right? I mean, so that's the thing is he didn't have that opinion. He's going to stick to it belligerently and, hey, this is what I'm doing and I'm doing it because it's different. There's a process that you respect to it, Ryan. So even when you don't agree with them, you're like, but I respect that guy's, or you may be like, you know what? That guy that I respect said this on this kid that's way different than mine. Let me go back in the film room again and just reevaluate the kid. And you may come back with the same opinion you already had, but you're more open to that. You know what I mean? And so it's okay to be different. My problem with some of the recruiting services is that there does tend to be a very clear bias towards programs, pro and against. And it's because it's more about things than just talent or projection, right? Like, I've had to do things in my grading system to protect against biases. I have a bias for big receivers, and I have tended to overrate big receivers because I look past certain things because I like big receivers. So I've had to create a grading system that doesn't overinflate certain things. Some people may evaluate, like a buddy of mine puts way too much emphasis on speed at running back. It's a very clear bias he has, even though I've given him 10 years worth of evidence of guys who aren't burners that are great college backs. Doesn't matter. You have to do things because everyone has a bias. And somebody in the chat earlier said a bias is being dishonest. No, it's not. If it's an intentional bias, then yes, I don't like Notre Dame players, or I don't like Notre Dame fans because they were mean to me when I used to work for a Notre Dame site. That's dishonest. But if it's like, I like bigger receivers, or Ryan likes certain traits on defensive linemen, that's a bias, but it's not a dishonest bias. I just tend to like that. And so when guys have those traits, I'm going to probably have them higher maybe than other people are, because I tend to have a bias towards those traits. And good evaluators are going to do things to say, hey, I tend to miss this position consistently. Why? And then you evaluate yourself. That's what good evaluators do, is they don't, if you keep missing at quarterback, then maybe your process for evaluating quarterbacks is flawed. You need to reevaluate that. And so that's things I've had to do over the years at certain positions, because like I said, I had a lot of misses early on with big receivers, going back to like Dan Buckner back in like the 08 class. And so, okay, where am I missing? I'm missing on 6'5" plus receivers. You know what I mean? And so like, okay, I've got to figure out a way to evaluate these things so I don't continue to miss on these guys, and think about, why am I missing on these guys? And so I think that if you find people that do that, then you don't care that they're wrong. That's fine. I'm wrong. I've had bad misses in my evaluation. I think I've had a lot more wins, but I've had a lot of bad misses. And so you have to really evaluate why. Why do you have those misses? And then alter your process. And those are the people I respect. And be open-minded enough to change your mind. Like Ryan, there was a quarterback a couple of years ago that you were really high on, but then as his career progressed, like, he didn't develop the way that I wanted him to. So you didn't just like stubbornly hold on to it. You said, hey, he's not the guy that I thought he was 2 years ago. And evaluation changes. That's how you need to be. So, yeah. Good stuff. Thanks, Andre.
Josh Miller with a question. Thank you, Josh. Watching the Lions this year has shown me how important culture and leadership is in a program. Would you say player leadership has been down at Notre Dame since Coach Freeman has taken over?
No. No, I think we started to see this late in Brian Kelly's tenure. I think this is a continuation of what we saw in the last couple of years of Brian Kelly's tenure, to be honest with you. I think Notre Dame had player leadership issues in 2019. I think they had player leadership issues in 2021. So I would argue this is a continuation of what he's weeding out a culture that existed when he arrived, is what I would say, more so than it being an issue since he took over. Thoughts on that, Ryan? Agree, disagree? I think Ryan's frozen. Yeah, Ryan's having some technical difficulties right now, but that would be my take on that one. So let's get to the next question here from Beefeater ND08. Brian, if you were Gordon Gekko and you were going to buy out a rating service and remove the ND bias as the new owner, which one would it be, and which other service would you buy and sell for parts? So if I was Gordon Gekko, what I would do is I'd start my own. I would build up CFB Nation. I would have the capital to do that, and I would kind of the parts that I would kind of buy. I would buy On3, and there's some things that On3 does as far as a layout thing. They provide all the rankings of the other services. They provide visit. There's some really good stuff that On3 does from an actual like website quality standpoint that I really like. I love the fact that they're willing to put all the other recruiting rankings in there and then link you to that player's page. I love that. Where other services like we're not linking anything, we're not mentioning anything. They're okay with that. I think that's a really good thing. They the way that they handle things. There's some oddness to the layout that I would like to see different. I mean, like one thing I like about Rivals is everything that Rivals has is on kind of like that one page, where with On3 you've got to kind of click to different links. So I would kind of make some changes over there. There's really not a whole lot at 247 that I would care about as far as like the way the website is laid out. This has nothing to do with Irish Illustrated. Love those guys. They, you guys know I love the job that the Tims do there. This is about the website, the structure of the website, which is not in their control at all. That's what 247 does. But there's not a whole lot that I find endearing about the layout of their website. There's some things Rivals does that I like, some database things that they do that I like. I think On3 is a little bit more easy to manage, and I like that aspect of it. So, but I would start my own. I would do my own thing. I wouldn't take anyone else over. I would start my own. If I had that kind of capital, I would start my own. Absolutely what I would do. Jesse Ferguson, when a 3-star player has a great senior season and fails to move up, I always assume they just aren't being scouted. But Bryce Young moving down 4 spots on Rivals of the All-American game is absolutely insane. Yeah, that one makes no sense to me. I mean, Ryan, you were there. I can't think of a single reason why you could justify. I mean, I saw a lot of the clips, and not all of them, but I saw a lot of the clips that Ryan sent me. I can't think of a reason why you would move him down from 216 to 220. Like, okay, it's one thing if you had him 24th and you move him down to 28th. Okay, fine. Yeah. But he's already way too low, and then you move him down some more. That one made no that just, to me, someone has stubbornly decided they think this is what they think about him, and they're just not going to be moved. That's that stubbornness thing that you and I have talked about, Ryan, where you have to be confident as an evaluator. You shouldn't be stubborn as an evaluator, because there's a difference. Confident means you're going to have to make a case to move me off of it. I'm going to need to see more than just a couple plays or one good game to move off of my evaluation that I did off of, over the course of a couple seasons. That's why I think it's so nuts to take a guy and make a huge jump based on an all-star game. Like you can move a guy based on an all-star game because you saw him up in Perth. He's a little bigger than you thought, a little quicker than you thought. But like a guy shouldn't go from like number 275 going into the all-star game to top 40 coming out unless you just flat out got his evaluation wrong, right? Like if it's something like that. But, so you've got to be, hey, this is what I believe. I've put in the work to come to that, but I'm open to having my opinion changed if you can present me a case or present me evidence. That's a good place to be, Ryan. I know you're that way with I'm confident in my evaluation. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm confident in it. But I also think that you're someone who's someone I respect says something different. We have a discussion. I'll go back and look at it and be open to changing my opinion if the film tells me I should change it. But what you can't be is someone who's like, I've made this opinion and I'm not backing off of it no matter what. That's stubbornness. That has no place to me in evaluating and ranking. Confidence, sticking to your principles is a good thing. Just blind stubbornness, just for the sake of it, is another thing. And the ranking that Rivals has of him just strikes me as that. It seems to be just a very stubborn, I'm not backing off of this opinion of him move, despite the fact he's huge, he's athletic, had a monster senior season in a pretty good area, and he then went down and played really well at the All-Star game. There's no argument you can make that he's not a top 100 player. You could argue that he's not a 5-star, but you can't argue he's not a top 100 player. And then to move him down in the top 200, that seems nuts to me, Ryan.
Well, moving down is weird. I mean, I think that for me, like all-star games are always verification, right? It's either this guy's exactly what I thought he was. It solidifies your process, or he didn't look as good as I thought he would. So I need to go back and watch more and be able to dissect this game a little bit. And I don't understand how anybody could, because if you had a moment of like, oh wow, Bryce Young was really good in San Antonio, I didn't quite see that on film, I'm going to go back and look. There should be no impulse to drop him after that. Mm-hmm. Like that process just is weird and it doesn't make a ton of sense. So I just think I don't know if it's a bias thing. I don't know what the reasoning exactly is for it. I don't know if there was a previous assumption or a thought that crossed. Like I don't know what the impulse there is, but I could say confidently by being down in San Antonio, I didn't hear a single person have anything but positive things to say about Bryce Young and a lot of climate. I mean, literally one service moved them up into a 5-star because of the
A
performance they
service
had.
that we
Like,
think
yeah,
has an anti-Notre Dame bias. Well, I shouldn't say we. I don't know your opinion on this. I think has an anti-Notre Dame bias. In my opinion, has an anti-Notre, and they still were like, gosh, this kid, we can't look at what we just saw and not jump them up. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's a weird one.
It's a weird one.
one.
Yep. We had Bear Down Soldiers says, "Can you speak on finally having championship depth on Notre Dame?"
They're getting there. They're getting there. I would say what right now, Ryan, in my opinion, there's only one position right now that I worry about Notre Dame having the depth needed to compete for championship. Now, there's positions where the talent maybe isn't quite where it needs to be yet, but as far as from and that's safety. Safety is the only position right now that I say I don't know that the depth of talent is good enough right now. That position is the reason you go out and win a championship from a depth standpoint. I mean, cornerback I think is there, depth wise, linebacker, D line, receiver, tight end, O line, quarterback, running back. I mean, I think from a depth standpoint, this is the deepest team Notre Dame has had in a long time, and this show is about early enrollees, and the 24 class is going to be a big part of that because there's guys that can play right now. And, I think the high-level talent at certain positions, D-end, interior offensive line based on what we had last year, safety opposite Xavier Watt. I mean, there's some positions where I'd like to see the high-level talent get better. Nickel, I liked Thomas Harper. I like Jordan Clark, but I'd still like to see an even higher level guy, like a more like elite top 100 type of player there, where there's still places where I think that the top level talent needs to get better. You could make a case for D tackle after Riley Mills and Cross are gone. Who are those guys? So there are some positions where I think the top end talent, defensive end is another one where, that's why these last 23 and 24 classes have to hit. Because if those guys reach their upside, then I think that changes things a little bit. But, Bryce is the only one that I think he can play right now in him. A lot of it's project. Can Boubacar get there? Can Brennan get there? Can Logan get there? We'll see. So those are positions where I think the high-level talent needs to get better. But I think the depth across the board outside of safety is really good. Like, really good.
Yep.
To where you can lose a guy and still put a pretty good guy on the field.
It's the deepest the program's been in some time, in my opinion. I mean, there might have been some periods where you have more high-level talent at position X or position Y, but for the most part, the depth, and I think that raises the floor. I mean, we just saw Michigan win a national championship mostly because of the depth that they've been able to create. They were just a team that was pretty solid to good at every single spot. There weren't a ton of true elite players on Michigan this past year. It was just about D tackles were good, pass rushers were good, linebackers were good, safeties were solid, corners were good, offensive line was good. Just a bunch of good across the board. And I think that you raise that floor and then hopefully you hit on a couple of key spots, obviously a couple of pass catchers, a quarterback, impact pass rushers. If you hit on that, then you have a chance to win a national championship. I think you need both. You just don't need just depth. You need depth plus a couple of headliners.
That's why Boubacar, Logan Thomas, Bryce Young are so important. They've got to hit out. They've got to hit because they can be that kind of like, I don't know that you need, like, I'll look at Michigan for an example, right? They've in the 3 years that they were a playoff team, there was only 1 year they had truly elite edge players. And that was the first year they got destroyed by Georgia. They didn't have Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo types on this year's class, but they just had really good pass rush across the board. However, for Notre Dame to get there with the way they play defense, I do think that they need to have a higher level of pass rush, in my opinion. And that's why Boubacar and Bryce and Logan are so important to get those guys to pan out. So, Ryan, what I'm going to do is since your internet's a little spotty, I'm going to just go ahead and read these from now on. And then if you're able to answer them, you can. And then I'll start to answer them if for some reason. I think it'll be a little bit easier that way. And we're getting close to the end. So you guys getting storms over there today? You're muted.
I'm not sure. It just keeps going in and out a little bit on me. So I'm getting a low signal. So I don't know.
All right, we got Robert Bishop says, do you guys think Tommy Rees has ever given a chance to stay at Alabama? No. mean,
No.
what Tommy does offensively is some way different than what Kalen DeBoer does offensively. So no, that wasn't going to happen.
And he brought over Ryan Grubb, who is his guy, who knows his system, and is one of the best offensive coordinators in college football. So you're good to go.
And I don't know that Tommy and Jamarcus Shepard necessarily hit it off real well during that interview process. So I don't think that would have helped the odds of him staying either. Nate, Indy Milton fan says, do you think rotating players will go down with Mike Brown as the wide receivers coach?
No idea.
I don't think so based on what he did at Wisconsin this year. They didn't rotate receivers a ton at Cincinnati, Ryan, but there's a bigger difference between their starters and their backup guys at Cincinnati.
Yep.
They had a pretty nice rotation this year. But at the end of the day, Indy Milton fan, that's going to be up to Mike Denbrock, not Mike Brown. Like Mike Denbrock's going to say, I want a 4-man rotation, a 5-man rotation, whatever, and then it's up to Mike Brown to get that job done. Archer452 says, Ryan, the 2025 NFL draft cornerback class feels loaded. Benjamin Morrison, Travis Hunter, Will Johnson. I don't know who. Oh, Denzel Burke. Sorry. Is it one of the best cornerback classes in recent memory, and how would you rank them on the big board?
Archer, they're not going to be ranked for several months, man. I'm trying to get through the 2024 NFL draft. You're throwing 2025 kids at me, man. I honestly, I watch Benjamin Morrison every single week. I haven't sat down and graded Benjamin Morrison as an NFL draft prospect. I haven't done it with Travis Hunter. They both weren't draft eligible. I did a little early work on Denzel Burke because I actually thought Denzel Burke could enter the draft. I liked a lot of what I saw from Denzel Burke. Will Johnson was also a true sophomore this year. So literally haven't graded any of those 3 players. If you want to talk to me in the preseason, I'll have some early evaluations for the 2025 NFL draft.
ESPN, Ryan, came out with their preseason All-Americans, and they had Travis Hunter first team and Benjamin Morrison second team. And yes. I just continue to find that absurd. Like Travis Hunter, if you want to put him as an all-purpose player first team, that's fine. I mean, there's not a lot of guys that do what he does in all phases of the game. Travis Hunter was a very mediocre cornerback this year, in my opinion. Mediocre.
I'm not.
This year, in my opinion.
I mean, I haven't gotten any feedback from the NFL because again, he's not draft eligible. But I'm not so sure that Travis Hunter's not a wide receiver on the NFL. I mean, we'll see. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, people see the highlight reel interceptions, and they're like, "Wow, what a great player!" And I'm like, "No, because he's constantly getting beat." Now, could he be better if he focused on one side of the ball? Sure, he could, but he's not. And to your point, I think you could make a case that he might be a better wide receiver than a cornerback. But I definitely am not taking him over Benjamin Morrison. But that's just – and they didn't have Xavier Watson the first team either. Although that one they had Malachi Starks and Caleb Downs. I would have Xavier Watson first team. That's 2 pretty good freaking football players. Like that's one where you can have Xavier's unanimous last year, but how's Caleb going to be as a sophomore and Malachi's going to – okay. I may disagree, but those are really good football players. Having Travis Hunter be first team is just all about hype. And that's all it is. Paul Carney says, what is the process when hiring a head coach when you are discussing the potential coaching staff? Does management sign off on Harbaugh, for example, on Harbaugh's choices?
As far as I'm a little confused what this question is asking.
Yeah, so when you're interviewing for a head coaching job and you're going to talk, because that's got to be part of the process. Any good head coach is going to go into an interview and they say, hey, what are your thoughts on staff? And you're going to have guys that you talk about, and sometimes it may not be a guy that you actually may get, but you still talk about that guy. That's got to be part of it. And so the question is, when you're discussing that, does management sign off on those choices? And he's specifically asking about Harbaugh's choices.
Yeah. I mean, so kind of some of that, Paul, I mean, I can speak more from NFL terms. I'm sure college is probably similar, but when you interview for a coaching job, you have to have an off-season plan. You have to have what you want your program to look like. I mean, you basically have to have an itinerary of everything that you want to logistically achieve while you're a part of the program. And they will ask you about who do you like as assistant coaches? Who are some guys that are just on top of your mind on your short list? Because coaches always have short lists. They always do, of guys that they like, guys that they've coached with in the past, guys that they've admired from afar. And that stuff will not be decided right then, obviously, because there's a whole hiring process that needs to happen after that, right? The only situation that might be different is, let's say Kalen DeBoer gets hired at Alabama, and maybe in the hiring process, he's like, yeah, I'm signing off here, but also Ryan Grubb, would love to bring him. Jamarcus Shepard, would love to bring him. Mm-hmm. And that's a part of that conversation, obviously. But in most situations, it's about, hey, what's your offseason plan? Who are some people you like? What do you want to accomplish? How do you see them in the vision? And then after that hiring process is done, that's when you start vetting your offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, position coaches, that type of thing. It's a part of a process.
The only time you're going to have them immediately sign on or sign off for a guy is someone that they either have experience with in the past, or B, someone who or someone who the management may be like, no, we're not hiring that guy. We're not bringing that guy. No, you can't bring that guy. You know, you may say, hey, I want to have so-and-so as my D coordinator. And you're like, no, whether it's that guy has a track record we don't like, that guy was here before, we had issues, you know, that you may not be aware as a head coach candidate, things like that. That's usually the only time they'll just flat out reject a guy. You know, normally they're going to give the head coach, like if you don't trust the head coach to put his own staff together, that's not a guy you should be hiring as the head coach. But you do, to your point, Ryan, you do want to have an idea of, like, who's he talking about and what does that say about his vision? And then, like you said, ask, okay, well, how does this guy fit your vision? Because that can tell you, like, hey, you know, when this guy tells me who his OC is going to be, that tells me a little something about what he wants to do offensively, because the type of coaches he's going to look at. Does this guy prioritize line play? Does this guy prioritize special teams? You know, like all those type of things. Those things can give you a good glimpse into that. But more often than not, if they like what they hear, they'll sign off on the head coach making those decisions once he is hired. And I think it's a little even easier in college, because a lot of times in college you're getting head coach is going to be head coach somewhere else, and so, like, yeah, I'm bringing this guy with me, you know, and that's kind of how it'll go. NFL is a little different because you have it's just a little different in the NFL, in my opinion.
Yep.
So. And we have one last question, Ryan, and then we're out of here.
Archer 452, Notre Dame is tied for 10th with the most consecutive seasons with an AP poll appearance, 13 straight seasons starting in 2011. Do you see them ever having a fully unranked season again? Certainly hope not.
Well, if it wasn't for the preseason poll, Notre Dame would have never been ranked in 2016. So, I mean, let's be honest about that. If like they were like, hey, we're not going to do our first poll till week 3, like some people have advocated for it, there's no way Notre Dame is ranked. So that's the one exception. If we're being honest, the 2016 season, they would not have been ranked if it wasn't for the preseason ranking. I mean, they lost their opener, but and what lost, they were 1-3 to start the season. But no, I don't see Notre Dame ever having a fully unranked season in any time soon. I don't. I mean, before Brian Kelly arrived, I think 2009, I think they were ranked at one point in time. I think the last time before that they were never ranked, I think, has to go back to 2007, where they weren't ranked. They weren't ranked at all in 2008 either. So 7 and 8, they went back-to-back years where they were never ranked in the top 25. And then 2009, they started preseason top 25, and then fell out, and then jumped back in twice later in the season and finished unranked. But no, I have a hard time seeing, Ryan, them being out of the top 25 in the near future, much less an entire season of not in the top 25. I have a hard time seeing that with the talent on this roster. And
it'd be very depressing if that ever happened. So let's not even think about that. Not think about that.
I don't see it. I mean, there were certain things about the 2015 season that I was warning people about in the offseason, that this is a problem. This is a problem. This could be bad. I was on Bill King's show before the 2016 season, and I said Notre Dame is either going to be really good or they're going to collapse, because you could see the strength issues, which I railed about for an entire year and people got pissed at me for. And I talked about Brian Van Gordon, how he shouldn't have been there. Like, there were things you could see that this could get really ugly with this football team, with Van Gordon and Longo and the whole quarterback issues and things that I was hearing about Deshaun. I mean, there were parts of your roster you could look at and say, boy, that may not be where you needed to be. You're needing Avery Sebastian to step up and play for you at safety this year. There's some concerns here. There aren't those at all with this team at all. And so I don't see it. I really don't. I don't. So
I forgot about Avery Sebastian. I haven't heard that name in a couple years.
Who was really good as his first couple years at Cal, and then he had just some really bad injuries, and he just was just not he had the athleticism of a Mike linebacker in 2016, and Notre Dame was asking him to play free safety. It was not good. Their best safety that year was Drew Tranquil. It was not good. It was not good. Yeah, so that'll do it, Ryan. Should go ahead and take us out of here, buddy.
All right, folks. Well, appreciate you all for hanging out with us today. Before you go, if you could just hit that like button for us. And by the way, if you missed the beginning section of the podcast, talked about the new 247 rankings, talked about rivals rankings, also broke down the early enrollees, all 15 of them, and what we can expect for them early on in their Notre Dame career. Hit that like button for us, hit the subscription. Make sure that you also hit that notification bell on YouTube. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, whether that is Apple, Spotify, or anything in between, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. Boards.irishbreakdown.com, recruiting intel, team intel, moving you further and further into the offseason. And we'll talk to you guys again very soon here on the Irish Breakdown podcast.